The views and opinions in this program are not those of CISA 7 or Spectrum.
I'd like to call the board member to order, board meeting to order. Board member, call board. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Then I'll ask Laura McCoy to read our mission statement.
We educate all students to be college, career, and community ready, inspired to succeed in our diverse world.
Thank you, Laura. Next is our open forum. This is a time for members of the community to speak before the board. We provide two different opportunities during tonight's meeting to speak before the board. All speakers must fill out a form indicating their desire to speak. If you wish to speak during tonight's open forum, you may do so with respect to items that are posted on tonight's agenda or any other matter you wish to share with the board. Please know that Wisconsin's open meeting laws prohibits the board from conducting business on matters brought during this open forum. The board will also permit public participation during agenda items that the Board of Education will be voting on as noted on the board's agenda. During this public participation time, consistent with state and federal laws, board members may engage in dialogue with the speakers. In order that all voices are heard, the board will suspend engagement until all speakers have had a chance to speak. Please keep your comments to 5 minutes. The timekeeper will let you know when your 5 minutes has ended. Prior to starting your comments, please provide your name and address. Lastly, demonstrations during public comments, such as clapping or cheering in response to either public comments or statements made by board members, are prohibited. At this time, I have one person who has indicated she'd like to speak before the board, and I'll call up Sarah Pamprin. Okay. Hang on a minute. Our timer is getting her cards.
Diane?
Diane, can we have some tech support up here, please? For once, it's not me. I have that on film.
Laura,
May I help?
I think Rhonda's the one. All right. Are your comments less than 5 minutes?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead and start.
All right. Good afternoon, evening. My name is Sarah Pamprin. I was a teacher at Eisenhower Elementary from 2012 to 2015. I then left my position there to go to Iowa State University to pursue my PhD. And I have now returned all but dissertation, and I have been hired to teach in the bilingual program at Edison Middle School as a 6th grade teacher. And in preparation to return, I was reading, because I was in Iowa and saw that there are really no bilingual programs, interested in the statutes that are written into state law here in Wisconsin. And one thing that I found interesting and I thought we could have a conversation about or consider, and if we do have it, I'd love to hear more about it, but there is a statute here that's 115.98, and I'm just going to read what it says and then just kind of ask for a little bit of a conversation about that. So it says that any bilingual and bicultural program in a district should also have an advisory committee. And I'll read what it says on the website. It says, in each school district which establishes a bilingual bicultural education program under this subchapter, the school board may appoint a bilingual bicultural advisory committee to afford parents and educators of It says limited English proficient, I like to use bilingual, pupils the opportunity to advise the school board of their views and to ensure that a program is planned, operated, and evaluated with their involvement and consultation. The committee shall assist the school board in informing educators, parents, and legal custodians of bilingual pupils that a program exists. The committee shall be composed of parents of these pupils enrolled in the bilingual bicultural education program, bilingual and other teachers, bilingual teachers' aides, counselors' aides in the district, at least one representative from the community, and a representative of the school district administration. The reason I want to address this is it's no secret that most of our bilingual teachers here in Green Bay Public Schools are white native English speakers. And oftentimes, as is the case here this evening, the people that are having the conversations about policies and practices in our district are usually white native English speakers, including myself. And so I think that it's really important that we find a way to involve parents and the community in more of the decisions that are made in our bilingual program. Thank you.
Thank you. And someone will follow up? Yes, okay.
Absolutely.
Someone will follow up with you, okay?
Thank you, Sarah.
Is there, pardon, Sarah Pamprin. Is there anyone else who would like to speak before the board during the open forum tonight? Seeing none, then we'll go to roll call. Sandy?
Becker?
Here.
Short?
Here.
Maloney?
Here.
McCoy?
Here.
Sitnikov?
Here.
Warren?
Here.
Noah Becker?
Here.
All 6 board members are present. As most of you know, we did appoint a new board member. Her first board meeting will be September 11th. She was unable to be here tonight. Also at the table is Noah Becca, our Intercity Student Council from West High School, and then is Jamie coming, do you know? Okay. And if Jamie comes, Jamie is our president of Intercity Student Council. She's from West High School. To my left is Dr. Michelle Langenfeld, our superintendent, and to my far left is Sandy Heller, our board secretary. Next, I'd entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Or do we have to take a roll call, Sandy? No? Opposed? All right, the minutes from the board meetings as listed have been approved. We have no communications to be placed on file today. And then next is our monitoring reports, and that will be facilitated by Laura McCoy.
We are going to be hearing from, I think, from Vicki Byer.
And John.
Oh, and John Magus.
Team.
And team. Excellent. Always love a team.
And we're here as a team because we really believe that in the strength of ensuring that MLSS, multi-level systems of support, is a combined effort between student services support and academic supports for our students. It encompasses the universal for students as well as what we do when students need additional supports. But they're so intertwined because if a student is disengaged from academics, quite often there will be behavioral issues. And likewise, if a student is having behavioral issues, it makes it challenging to be involved from an academic standpoint. So those are just a couple of ways in which our work is combined and intertwined together. So I'd like to introduce my team of people who are with me, and Vicki will be introducing hers. This is Dr. Nancy Chartier, who is our Executive Director of Elementary, and Mike Fries, who is Executive Director of our Secondary Programming.
And representing the behavior team tonight, we have Dana Hansen and Jackie Haves. We're also joined by Michelle Graffs, who's part of the team. Sandy Byer was unable to make it tonight, but she sends her regrets.
So the purpose of our update today is to provide some information on the progress we've made with multi-level systems of support during the 2017-18 school year, as well as to provide some key updates as far as next steps related to universal supports, as well as Tier 2 and Tier 3 supports for our students.
Ladies, you're close enough, Jackie?
So this last year was our first full year of behavior MLSS implementation within the district. Schools were requested to take the Tiered Fidelity Inventory Survey, which is a measure that we use of universal implementation in our schools. Throughout this year, there were 4 district behavior management teachers who supported schools in the implementation of behavior MLSS. So each of us supported around 10 to 11 schools. We would support the school teams within their school. At the universal level, we would also support school teams at Tier 2 and at Tier 3 as well. One of our measures for implementation of behavior MLSS at the universal level to see how are our schools doing with implementing to Fidelity is using triangle data. Triangle data is measured using administrator required events that are documented in our school's behavior information system or Infinite Campus. So for Tier 1, we are looking at 80% or higher of our students receive only 0 to 1 admin required event, and the goal is to have that 80% or more of our students with only 0 to 1. For Tier 2, we're looking at 15% or less of our students to have 2 to 5 admin required events documented. And then for Tier 3, we're looking at 5% or fewer of our students who have documentation of 6 or more admin required events. Our schools monitor this triangle data on a monthly basis. So the school teams are looking at this triangle data, and this result is at the end of the year. So you want that percentage of students with that number of referrals at the end of the year. So our schools are continually monitoring it on a monthly basis. And we also monitor it as well and compile the data for our schools. So this year when we looked at all of the schools and then we looked at the average of our schools district-wide, the result was 90.7% of our students had 0 to 1 admin required event. So that was greater than the 80% that we're looking for. For Tier 2, we had 5.92% of our students who had 2 to 5 admin required events, and we had 3.35% of our students have 6 or more admin required events. One of the things too to consider is to receive these results, we did take the average of our schools. So there is the possibility that some of our students were counted twice, because if they went from one school to another school, the data goes with that student. So if they were at Eisenhower, their data stays at Eisenhower, and then when they go over to Sullivan, their new data is calculated at Sullivan.
Another way that we measure fidelity is through the Tiered Fidelity Inventory. It's a survey that our universal leadership teams take within our buildings, or sometimes they're called universal behavior teams. It's a series of 15 questions at the universal level that asks questions regarding their teams, their implementation, and evaluation. When, when a team has reached 70%, they are considered to be at fidelity. Based on the standards that were set through the Wisconsin RTI network. They have checked and they said that's the gold standard. When you hit 70, that's when you'll start to see the behavioral outcomes going in your favor. This is just a snapshot of how our buildings are doing. We use that data then, the results of the survey, to make an action plan. And we use that then throughout the next year to see what systems need to be improved. Do we need to have additional members on our team? How is our data looking? we had, as a district, our percent was 76%. And then when I filtered out the schools that had not been formally trained in PBIS, we had an average of 85% of those schools. So well within our gold standard. Another fidelity measure is the self-assessment survey. This is also taken by our schools. The TFI, the Tiered Fidelity Inventory, and this self-assessment survey are taken one time a year. The self-assessment survey is a little different. It's taken by all staff members of a building. It's a perception survey to see what our staff feel, how our staff feel about how we're implementing. It's based on 4 support systems: a school-wide discipline system, the non-classroom, so your cafeteria, your hallways, your playgrounds, your classroom management system, so individual teacher classrooms, and then systems for students that are engaging in those chronic problem behaviors, the kids that we would be giving tier 2 and tier 3 supports to. Like I said, it's taken by the whole staff. We try to get everyone, the custodial staff, the secretaries, everyone's perception, because everyone should know what we're doing in the universal. On the survey, you have 2 things you have to do for each question. You have to decide if it's in place, partially in place, not in place, but then you also have to decide if it's a high need, a medium need, or a low need for improvement. We take both of those when we're looking at the survey results to create that action plan again. The Tiered Fidelity Inventory and the self-assessment survey are kind of checks and balances. The team may think that everything's going really well, but then the staff may have a different perception, so we use that. If they don't match, then it helps us decide if we need to do some more professional learning around the systems, or if we need to increase communication. When we have those surveys done, we create an end-of-year report, and I have an example linked in. Are you able to open that? Sorry.
Thank you.
So this is just an example of one of the end-of-year reports that we have. The first page documents from the year that they started after they were formally trained in PBIS, and we track their SAS. The TIC, the Team Implementation Checklist, and the BOQ were surveys that we used to take, the benchmarks of quality. The Tiered Fidelity Inventory has replaced those. We keep going then, and they make a plan. They decide what they're gonna do, what they've done already this past year, what they're gonna do next year, and then this is where we monitor as the year goes on, so that next year we'll see, are we doing all of these things? At the very bottom is where they take the pieces from this SAS and the TFI and create that action plan. The questions that that were not in place, that were partially in place or not in place, we pick a few of those and add those to the action plan and decide what we're gonna do to improve those scores.
Okay, and I'm going to cover the disciplinary hearings for the year and the data that we had there. Beginning with a summary of the number of hearings that we've had since the 2012-13 school year. This past school year, we had 165 hearings. When we look at the specific board policy violation, the next slide shows the breakdown, and significantly out of the 165, 110 disciplinary hearings were for threatening, aggressive, or violent behavior. The superintendent wanted me to share also for your viewing what the grade level breakdown was, not only overall for the 165 hearings, but also if we looked at the number 1 reason for hearings, the threatening, aggressive, and violent behavior. So if we first look at slide 11, you'll note that every grade level except for kindergarten was brought to hearing this year, with 8th graders being the majority of the hearings. And then if we look specifically at policy 443.7, the aggressive, violent, threatening behaviors, majority, again, 8th graders. But we did, if you'll note, please, that elementary, we did see an increase this year. Actually, the last 2 years, we saw an increase. And within the report, I shared that because of the increase and needed to continue to provide education for these students, we started a new class at Minoka Hill, specifically for regular education elementary students. And that classroom was at capacity pretty early on in the school year. Next, I wanted to share the hearing results. Out of the 165, 39 of the students were able to remain in their school. This is in coordination with the building principal. They would be given a contract, a behavior contract, with the expectation that they would follow through with attendance, no behavior referrals, and working on their academics. 5 students were moved to an external out-of-district placement. For example, Advocates is an organization that we contract with. These are for students that could be Tier 3, or in some cases, if we want to call out a Tier 4, where their needs are greater than what we can provide within the district. 93 of the students were moved to Minoka Hill, which is part of why when I came to the board in November, December, I told you we were at capacity at Minoka, we were concerned. This is part of the reason why. 16 change of placement other. These are students that we would either do one-on-one tutors or two-on-one tutors or online programming, which again, that was a direction the board gave back in January, that we should provide education for those students that could be on track for expulsion. And then 12 of the students were actually referred to expulsion to the Board of Education. I did want to provide a comparison at the bottom. 72 students last school year, 16-17 school year, were removed from their home school, compared to the 17-18 school year, where 126 were actually removed. The ethnicity breakdown is on the next slide. Out of the 165 students, 63 of our students were Black. I wanted to note to the Board of Education that that was one of our focuses this year, and we are seeing positive results, but we're still not where we need to be. In 16-17 school year, 43% of the students that went to hearing were Black, and this past year it was 38%. Again, still significant, and we're not okay with it, but we are seeing progress. The breakdown for gender and students with disabilities, there weren't any surprises there for us. We were glad to see that the majority weren't identified as students with disabilities. That was important to us as well, making sure that we provided interventions and strategies within the home school to ensure that our students with disabilities can remain there safely. And then I wanted to share, as I'd been sharing monthly with the board, we have a rough guess on how much it cost us last year for additional services for behavior purposes. We ended up about $343,876. That includes expenses for outside agencies such as Advocates, as I've mentioned, transportation, one-to-one para supports, and then the online learning that we increased this school year.
So our next steps for next year is that we're going to continue Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 trainings for our school teams. We currently have 4 schools who will be attending the Tier 1 training. We have 2 schools assigned to Tier 2 training, and we have 1 school who will be participating in Tier 3 training this next year. We will also, the behavior management support teachers will continue to support their schools in implementation at all 3 levels. And also next year, schools are asked for full participation in not only the tiered fidelity inventory, fidelity measure, but then also the self-assessment survey fidelity measure as well.
In addition, some of the changes that we've made, we eliminated the district office professional learning specialist position, and we're putting that FTE towards elementary counselor. We eliminated an associate director of pupil services position and created the hearing officer / district alternative education administrator in hopes that pupil services can get back to focusing on prevention. We will continue with monthly behavior data review and bring in the behavior team to review with the APs and deans at their monthly meeting. The executive directors of schools will continue to meet monthly with their principals and go over the behavior data. Jackie mentioned utilization of the data when they start putting together their school success plan, so that will be included as part of an engagement goal. And then develop coherence and communication system between the behavior team, so the 4 behavior folks and the executive directors, so we can more regularly communicate about things that we see that might be concerning or even the positive things.
Good idea. Does anyone have any questions about that portion of the presentation?
Jackie and Dana, could you explain or just describe specifically what the behavior management support teachers do?
So we do a variety of things. We meet with our Tier 1 teams within our schools and with our Tier 1 team leads, our internal facilitators. So at Tier 1, each school has an internal facilitator who leads their Tier 1 team. We meet with them and the team. And then at Tier 2, we also have internal facilitators who lead Tier 2 teams that look at the data on a monthly basis to put in Tier 2 intervention support for students. We meet with them and their teams, and we're there for both Tier 1 and Tier 2 is to help to ensure fidelity of implementation and support. We also, at the universal level, will help support classroom teachers and coaching in the classrooms to support successful classroom management. So our teachers know in our schools that if they have any questions around that universal classroom management, they can reach out to us and we will do a coaching cycle with them as well. And then also at the district level, then we also work as a team to look at overall behavior MLSS implementation throughout the entire district to ensure consistency in the framework across our schools within the district as well. So we provide internal facilitator training 4 times a year with our internal facilitators, so we plan that and implement that as well. We also look at the data, so then we look at all of the data that we shared with you today. We look at the triangle data, the tiered fidelity data, the SAS data. We'll look at which schools are showing that they're implementing to fidelity. We'll look at what schools are showing that they're struggling with implementation and discuss what types of resources need to be put into place at those schools to help support those schools to improve implementation as well.
Jackie, anything you want to
Did I miss anything?
No, I think that's pretty much it. We wear a lot of different hats. We're very busy.
How about the specific supports that you provide to classroom teachers in terms of classroom management? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Usually we'll meet with the teacher before going into the classroom just to find out what their concerns are. And we'll go in, collect some data, whether it's on task behavior for the students, opportunities for the students to respond, just to kind of get a feel of what we're walking into. We'll do some observations, meet with the teachers regularly, offer support and suggestions, and then kind of wean ourselves off of being in there as much. I don't know if that was clear at all, or add some more.
We work with the teacher to set goals on their classroom management based on the data that we collect while in their classroom, and then we work towards meeting those goals. Sometimes those goals are met really quickly, and then we'll reassess and collect the data again, and then another goal may be set. A coaching cycle can last anywhere from typically about 4 to extended about 12 weeks with one teacher.
And do you do that upon invitation of the teacher, the principal, both teams? How does that happen?
Both, usually by invitation of the teacher or administrator.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Rhonda?
What do you believe the difference is from what you were doing prior to the implementation of the MLSS?
That is a great question. Yeah, but expanding to different schools. We'll
Mm-hmm.
talk about that.
So we have always been supporting behavior MLSS. So some schools were kind of some initial early implementers of behavior MLSS and have been implementing for quite a few years. This last year now the expectation has been district-wide. So we work with our schools based on where they are at in implementation to help move them into implementing the aspects of behavior MLSS. So we have schools who may have been implementing for 10 years and already had teams established that we've been working with. And then we have some schools who just this year started to create school-based teams to look at their behavior implementation. So in those schools, we're working at initial implementation of defining their expectations and how are they going to teach those expectations, how are they going to document behavioral data at the school, and then how are they going to use that data to improve their implementation over time. So our schools are all at different stages of implementation, and then we just work at meeting them where they're at and help moving them to Fidelity.
Can I follow up? So I noticed the hearings had increased quite a bit. It was like 102 to 165 and a lot of 8th grade changes. Were those schools that originally, were they already implementing that and this was another year for them, succession? Or was this a new implementation system for those seems like middle schools?
Most of the middle schools were implementing already.
They were.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any idea why it's so much higher?
May I?
Yes.
Guesses. Greater focus this year. More eyes on the students. For example, Washington, we increased monitors. And talking to my peers in other big districts, they're seeing the same thing. So I would say it's a societal thing that we're seeing right now. Those are guesses. I did ask the team that did the hearings, 165 is high. Did anything come forward that you thought didn't rise to the level of requiring a hearing? And they said no. So what they saw were board policy violations that did in fact rise to the level of needing a hearing.
Were there any repeat offenders?
I think we had one.
One?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. If I remember right, we had one that remained at their school on a contract, but failed to fulfill the contract.
Any more questions? Oh, hi, Andrew.
Maybe without obviously real cases or names, could you just give me a little bit more of an idea as to what one of these sessions might look like with a teacher? Like when you're having a so if a teacher, let's say a teacher requests the coaching for classroom management, like what that actually looks like, because otherwise I'm just kind of guessing.
Mm-hmm. So, for example, I was asked at a middle school to, a teacher requested assistance in coaching for classroom management. So I initially met with the teacher and I asked what are some of the strengths that you are seeing within your classroom management, and then what are some of the areas of that you would like to improve within your classroom management. So from there then, I asked if we were to start working on one area, because classroom management can be all-encompassing and include a lot of multiple factors, which area would she want to work on first? And it was the bell work. It was how do I start my hour so that if I start my hour successfully, then the rest of my hour will hopefully go smoother. So I collected data around on task during her bell work before we started implementing any of the other strategies that could help her be successful. So I collected that data and we discussed what the on-time percentage was for those students. Then from there and through my observations, I discussed with her several suggestions that through observation, through knowing classroom management strategies that we learn, what would help her be more successful with bell work. So from there, it was an art classroom. So it was all around material management at the beginning of the hour. So we really worked on material management and what was the task they needed to do immediately when they entered the classroom. She made changes and was more explicit about her expectations. And then I would come back, and I was going there about twice a week for that 1 hour period. We only focused on 1 hour so that she could then carry that over into multiple hours. I would watch her implementation to see how she was doing at implementing the strategy she chose. Then after a couple weeks, I collected more data to find out, did we improve on task percentage of time for bell work? And then we did find a significant improvement in that on task percentage. And then I would talk about how was she carrying that over into other hours, and was she seeing improvement across time in other hours. From there, her hour did end up going more smoothly the rest of the hour. And at that point, then, I was not coaching her anymore. And that took about, it was about six to 8 weeks of me being in her classroom.
Rhonda?
Can you walk through the process of a referral to hearing, what that looks like for a student?
Sure. When a violation occurs that is a major violation, the building principal calls their executive director. And the executive director will talk them through due process. Did we get all of the evidence that we needed to ensure that the student's rights aren't being violated? Once it's been determined that, yes, this has been a true board policy violation and needs to go to the hearing, the student has already been suspended pending a potential hearing. Within 5 days, we'll hold the hearing. So the family is contacted. Sometimes we have it at the school building. If it was pretty serious and there's concerns about safety, we'll have it here at district office. Last year it was the associate directors of pupil services that would facilitate the hearing. A parent would be there, a parent or guardian, the student, sometimes a student services representative from the school to serve as an advocate and help calm the child. And the building principal attends as well. They go through the incident and then determine what an appropriate and fair consequence would be. It's discussed between the building principal and the executive director and the hearing officer. And then whatever the consequence is implemented.
Thanks.
Can you give, I don't know if you can do this accurately, but what's how much time does it take to put together 165 hearings?
Doing the paperwork in preparation is pretty extensive. We do have to follow all the legal requirements, so the packets, you've seen them for expulsion. It can take an hour to 2 hours for building leaders to put those together. Then it comes to district office and it has to be reviewed for accuracy and again for legal requirements. I would say on average just the preparation could take 2 to 3 hours. The hearing itself is about an hour long. If it's a student with disabilities, the manifestation determination hearing will happen as well. We're making a switch at the recommendation of the superintendent, and it makes sense. This year we will be doing the manifestation determination hearing first. That way, if we find that it is a result of the student's disability, there's no need for the hearing to happen. Last year we did it the other way around, and it really didn't make sense.
Okay. Michelle?
One of the things you talked about being proactive and moving forward, and one of the opportunities is to really move forward with monthly behavior data reviews for associate principals and deans. As you look at that, in addition to the reviews, are you also doing professional development, or how are you supporting, besides the review of the data, which is really important?
Mm-hmm.
How do you help shepherd that forward so that it is a proactive step in addition to?
We, back when Jennifer Higgs was the district equity coordinator, we started doing culturally responsive practices, PD, with the APs and deans. And I think we're seeing some of the results of that work today. It's really about, and we're doing it in the schools as well, the culturally responsive practices, getting to understand our students because they don't all look like us or grew up like us. And when we at the school level can really understand and have empathy for, appreciation for the backgrounds that our students are coming with, we handle situations differently. The more we learn about our students, the less afraid of them we are. So that's part of the PD. We'll continue to do that at the schools, not just for the administrators, but also the teachers. Part of that is the trauma-sensitive training as well, so we'll continue to do that. In fact, because of the security grants, every teacher, every staff member in the district will have the trauma training this year.
Thank you. So that's for the staff. What about for the students? What do they receive?
Yeah, that one is up to the building principals. Just like we like to differentiate with the adults, the schools differentiate as well. They might have decided that bullying is a focus for this year, so bring in some training for that. Are you aware of any?
Yes, 2 of the middle schools that I support have had discussions around relationship building at that secondary level between students. So part of their school success plan is around relationship building between students. So they're really working on creating learning with their students, because when students care about each other and know about each other, then they're less likely to hurt each other, and behaviors improve. So schools have been focusing on that as well.
And if I could add to that, thank you. Our new Associate Director of Pupil Services, Katie DeVillers, bless you. As a team together, they've been researching social and emotional curriculum, and hopefully we'll bring something forward this year to the board.
Anybody else? Andrew?
Okay, so if we have, when did we make the change to not having the to doing the manifestation hearing first? At the start of the year, mid-year change? When did we make the change?
It's been done that way as long as I know. I can only speak
All right,
for.
but you said we made, but a change was made.
Yeah, we'll start this year.
Starting this year.
Starting.
Okay, so, all right, so the 165 was under the old system.
Yes.
Okay, so that number would have, that number and the number of all the years before that would presumably have been lower. But I guess I'm interested in a little discussion on what does it mean that we're not doing that? I value administrative time, and I understand that if there's a manifestation determination, our options are limited, but I think is there something to be said for lack of a better way of saying it, even though the feds overruled us, we wanted to do what we thought was right,
I think I
and
see
dot
what
our
you're saying.
I's and cross our T's, even if an IEP might overrule what,
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I've sat in a lot of these. I'm pretty confident that the IEP team, under the direction of the associate directors of special education, come up with some interventions and strategies that follow the law and also ensure the safety of our students and staff.
So are we finding that the manifestation hearing and the disciplinary hearing were duplicating the work?
Yeah, that might be the best way to say it, yeah. So we do the hearing, and an hour later transition into the manifestation and find out, yes, it was a manifestation, and we end up with the same result. It's just that this time it would be through the IEP team instead of the Associate Director of Pupil Services.
Michelle?
If I could just,
Are you finished, Andrew?
I'll come back.
oh, it's otherwise.
No, go ahead.
Okay, it's related, and where it came to my attention was I had a teacher who was very confused, who said, well, we had the hearing, and the student was supposed to be, the disposition at the end of the hearing was X, and then went back and did a manifestation, and then said, well, we can't do that because the IEP team said that it was a manifestation of the disability, therefore we had to change it. And so it left this staff person going, wait a minute, I don't understand. And I think that the piece and my wonderment and my discussion after that was, well, if it's a manifestation of the disability, you could still move it to a hearing. You can still move it to a hearing, but you know that it's a disability. And then you know, that's my understanding of how that works. And so there was a lot of confusion about decisions made before it even went to an IEP team. And that was my confusion as well, and that's why I questioned it.
Andrew, did you have?
I did. I guess I'd like to know a little bit more about, I appreciate the, you know, I know that we're making steps, and I know that as a district, we're getting better at this as society gets better at it too, and I would, from what I've seen, I think we're probably a step or two probably ahead of society catching on to some of this stuff. Not 5 or 6, but a couple. So, so we have still, and of course it's tricky because you obviously, you want to have consistent, you want to have fair consequences for things that happen, and if there's more things happening, we don't want to reduce the consequences for one group to artificially bring balance. But presumably, unless you're saying that we've solved it, I guess, and you didn't sound like you were saying that yet, what are we doing about the situations that presumably still exist where a consequence, we're going to end up in across the large district, end up with more students of color getting the suspension where other students didn't, and still leading to that disproportionality, because that's improvement is good. I believe we're improving, but even a single incident where, you know, someone got a different consequence when the event was the same is really bad.
Yeah, I hope that's not happening.
But it probably isn't. It probably isn't completely gone yet, because otherwise the gap would at least be lower. I would presume, probably.
Yeah.
It's unconscious. I don't think it's intentional. But I guess I was just looking for a little bit more on what are we doing about like unconscious bias training and trauma aware, that kind of thing.
And that's part of the training that we're going to embark on this year. The equity team had presented to the superintendent and cabinet some cultural sensitivity training. I'm sorry that the title actually fails me. Claudia, do you remember what it's called, what your team's planning to do this year? Equity. It is just equity plan. And part of that, it addresses the, I'm sorry? Cultural competence. Part of it addresses what you just spoke of, the unconscious bias. So we begin with the principles on that one and eventually bring it to the teachers. We're also focusing on the family engagement coordinators, and we've done a lot with the students the past couple of years. Now we wanted to outreach to the parents, which I think the superintendent has shared with you, or will be sharing with you some of the events coming up this year to outreach to parents. We also want to expand our educational opportunities for students that are at risk. So an example of that would be the new School of Innovation that we open next school year.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else?
So you'd made a mention that, you know, is regarding staff, that there aren't a lot of staff that look like our students necessarily. So what is being done to maybe improve on that?
Good question.
Sure. Not prepared for a full report, but I'd be glad to provide additional details. Some of the work that we've done through centers has been specifically targeted at increasing the diversity of our workforce, and we're partnered with a partner in Oregon who actually their district was recognized as being one of the top districts in the nation for diverse hiring. A couple of examples of things that we're doing. One is targeted recruitment through Facebook, where we actually worked with an advertising campaign group to put together advertising that is targeted towards particular people that we're looking for in Chicago and Milwaukee. These are particularly bilingual positions that we're looking for. So there is sometimes a correlation. Sometimes, as we heard earlier, that a lot of our bilingual teachers aren't necessarily bicultural and coming from the Latino or Spanish-speaking cultures themselves. So we want to make sure that we're doing extensive hiring there. Other pieces involve partnership with some of the higher ed institutions, looking at diverse hiring opportunity, as well as non-traditional paths for certification. Thinking of a couple of individuals in a variety of settings where they have a bachelor's degree, for instance, but they don't have their teaching certificate, or they have their teaching credentials, but they don't have their administrative credentials. Terry Willems has been one that's been working with us in carving out new pathways and supports for those students. Professionals who are also students as well. So there are future teachers and our students. But I really think that a more robust, if we're looking at a pipeline of students, we have to think about what that recruiting ground looks like and how we're making connections for our high school juniors and seniors with our higher ed partners in the area, and looking at if we're having a pathway for manufacturing, we should also have a pathway for diverse teacher workforce as well.
May I speak to that briefly, John? It's one of the things I'm very excited about in secondary teaching and learning, and in partnership with UW Green Bay. This fall we will be offering that you had approved a dual credit course entitled Cultural Images for Materials or Immaterials for Children and Adolescents. It's one of the required courses for entrance into the education major at UW Green Bay, and it incorporates both matters of race and ethnicity, as well as First Nation studies, matters of gender and other equity pieces. And we are working with Dr. Kristen DePau from UW Green Bay around professional development with our staff and supporting them, as well as the professional learning was co-facilitated with Ingrid from our Parker Hill from our equity department. So we're very, very excited about our juniors and seniors who might be thinking, a career in education is a good path for me, and we would seek to, if we can get half a dozen of those students back in 5 years as our initial educators, that'd be very, very exciting. So thank you, John.
Sure.
Anything else? Okay, I think we can move on.
So really that's kind of a perfect transitional segue into how does teaching and learning apply to the multi-level systems of supports. But along with what we said about behavior and that shared ownership, thinking about the work that our leaders are doing, thinking about the work that our supervisors of principals, making sure that their capacities are sharp related to behavior is something that's been important. So this past year I had the 3 executive directors of schools go through some additional training related to urban and more intensive behavioral needs and issues. I think sometimes some of the training here in locally is quite powerful, but hearing from other people in urban settings where there are more significant situations of trauma and mental health need, as well as disproportionality issues that need to be addressed. Those are all factors that it's multifaceted, and it's a lift that both of us, all of us, need to and do take part in.
It is one of the key components. The social emotional pieces is a very critical component for the Urban Leadership Institute as well. So as we work to support principals in their learning too. So, and I'll talk a little bit about that later, but that is a critical piece of that work. It's not only around academics, but social emotional support of students from diverse backgrounds.
Mm-hmm. And what we see as well is behavior of students. There might be a student that is a Tier 3 student who needs particular support in a couple of the classes, but they might be having a great opportunity and great success in others. So part of it is that you're not a Tier 3 student throughout your whole day. And what we look at then is from a teaching and learning aspect, how do we make sure that we're capitalizing on what's working for the student, not just looking at what isn't working, but capitalizing on those successes. And one of those ways is to make sure that our instruction is as engaging as possible, and that comes through the curriculum resources and professional learning that we'll be addressing here from our secondary and elementary team. And it also has to do with intervention, because if a student is feeling that deep sense of disconnect, if they're multiple grade levels off course from where they should be, then it is hard in many respects to expect them to engage fully in rigorous instruction all day without additional support. So we also want to talk about what our instructional interventions look like at the secondary and elementary level. So starting with Mike, he's going to take us through our secondary math, then literacy, as well as some information on our secondary interventions. And then Nancy will take over and begin discussing our elementary literacy efforts, as well as elementary math bridges work, and a little bit of a dive into our intervention work. All of these topics are things that could take multiple hours of conversation and discussion. So if there are any deeper questions, or if somebody wants to go deeper with a particular area, all of us are open to inviting you in for additional conversation. Mike?
Thank you, John. Thanks, everyone, again, for the opportunity to update you on the district's progress in the area of general education, multi-level systems of support. Just a few slides of information, as you saw, to brief you on this evening, willing to address questions, of course. The information that I'm going to touch on falls in the areas of math and literacy at the secondary level. As Mr. Dorff asked about some clarification of roles, et cetera, earlier, I'd like to let you know that this past year, the folks on point for this work in secondary and teaching and learning included Linda Teskey, who Nancy will speak about a little bit later as well, who worked with our K-8 literacy coaches. Cindy Cantwell, who's our person for secondary math. Jane Delcor, who provided leadership and support for literacy intervention. And Beth Taylor, who was our ELA curriculum coordinator. With Jane's resignation earlier this summer, Beth will be assuming the training and support pieces for literacy intervention work in addition to her ELA curriculum duties. So again, in summary, in secondary teaching and learning, the team is Cindy for math, curriculum and intervention, Beth for ELA curriculum and literacy intervention, and Linda, who serves both elementary and secondary in the area of literacy, leadership, and coaching. So to begin with, an update on the strategic actions with regards to secondary math this past year. As this initial slide indicates, a lot of progress was made with regards to our offerings at the secondary level this past year. We've increased access to our AP computer science courses, not just one high school, but all 4 high schools for the fall. We have updated curriculum documents in many of our math electives, and we've requested and received approval for updated resources in many classes, and hopefully later tonight you'll approve our AP Stats resource request. Most recently this summer, our secondary math folks participated in our annual jurying process, where they outlined adjustments to the curricular scope and sequence, exactly how things are addressed in various math courses at the secondary level. And they also spent time this summer really defining exemplars and what we're looking for in our curriculum common assessments. While all of these tasks, click backwards, click back one, sorry, pardon me. I was doing so well. While all these tasks are places where our professional learning is naturally embedded, we also place greater emphasis in the area of collaboration among our interventionists this past year by continuing monthly, regularly occurring collaborative cohort meetings facilitated by Cindy. Administrative representatives from all secondary schools also were invited and attended on a regular basis. Additional teachers at the secondary level were able to complete their AVMR courses, and we had our first group of folks going through the AVMR fractions course. So maybe you've heard of AVMR 1 and 2. AVMR fractions is kind of like AVMR 3. In our second year of implementation of a formal intervention system in the area of math at the secondary level, we really emphasized intervention to Fidelity and documentation within Infinite Campus. That was definitely a learning curve for all of us this past year. Finally, as mentioned on this slide, our Turbocharge initiative allowed our secondary math teacher leaders to partner with NWTC and UW Green Bay faculty to further calibrate how we're defining college readiness expectations in the area of mathematics in our community. In the area of secondary literacy, this clicker is really on quite the delay here. One more. There we go. Can you back up for me one, Lori? I'm having problems with the clicker. Thank you. In the area of secondary literacy, we continue to scale up our adult professional learning within the middle school level through our literacy coaching framework. Our emphasis this past year remained primarily focused in the 6th grade, where we implemented increased writing expectations across all of our 6th grade classes and the incorporation of a words their way word work assessment. We've been field testing a compacted / accelerated curriculum approach to 7th and 8th grade in English language arts so that we would have a parallel to our math accelerated option. So we're looking at increasing that this year so we could have formal rollout in future years. Also, just as in math, we continued our jurying process on an annual basis to ensure that our expectations for instruction and assessment are equitable and rigorous across the district. These again are professional learning expectations embedded within the universal setting, but we also have a focus on more formal gatherings with our middle school and high school literacy and interventionists. We had monthly literacy leadership meetings with our literacy coaches at the middle school level, as well as our middle school principals, and the ongoing job embedded support of our literacy coaches through the leadership of Linda Teskey. Also, as with math, our high school ELA department chairs had the opportunity to partner with UW Green Bay and NWTC instructors to calibrate our efforts for college readiness in the area of English composition, writing, reading, and overall college readiness. One final slide I'd offer shows you how we've been able to maintain as well as increase our provision of intervention services in the area of mathematics and literacy over the past couple of years at both the middle and high school level. We're quite proud of the fact that we've continued to serve a large number of students. Of course, we'd like to see the number of students needing intervention to get back to grade level. We'd like to see that decrease over time. We'll keep working on that. Our emphasis last year was really on fidelity of intervention and learning to document things formally so that we could monitor progress. Heading into this year, our emphasis will be on the leadership aspect at the site level, as well as continuing the fidelity of intervention and documentation so that we can really target our supports as needed across the system. I look forward to updating you again later this year, next year, with our next level of progress. As you know, we have some new folks at secondary in terms of leadership positions at the middle and high school in various capacities, and so we need to make sure we get everybody on board and calibrated around what this looks like at secondary. Thank you.
Now we'll proceed on with Nancy with elementary, unless we have secondary questions at this time.
I do.
Go ahead.
You mentioned this about 3 times, Mike. Intervention with fidelity and documentation on IC for that intervention. Could you describe that for me, please?
Yes, sure. So we know it's not fair to impact a student's educational experience without having good justification that there's a learning need. And so we use what's called a personal learning plan process to identify students who might need a change in schedule and might need the opportunity to work in an intervention environment. And so that is a documented process through our MLSS process that is used in academics and behavior to talk about student strengths, areas of need, to document what types of things have been done, including some goal setting that can be done prior to saying we're going to include you in a formal second tier of intervention. That PLP is utilized eventually, if need be, to make the recommendation for a second tier of intervention. So once a student has been identified and placed in the second tier of intervention, where a math interventionist or a literacy interventionist is providing intervention on a daily basis according to the intervention that's targeted for that student, we've asked them to document on about a monthly basis in Infinite Campus the progress that's being made so that our teaching and learning specialists can be working with them to understand what sort of progress is being made, what support do you need, and then we administratively can work with principals to understand what sort of progress are your students overall making in terms of being able to exit out of intervention because they made the growth that's needed. Because the idea is to accelerate growth and not be in an intervention for the rest of your educational experience.
So teacher of English language arts for juniors would be able to go on to IC and see what interventions and why those interventions were in place for the students she's getting this fall.
Right. It may not be.
Assuming there were any. I mean.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. Correct. Now there may be, because there may be a need for a little support in how to access that information initially, because it's maybe not intuitive, and we were only in our first year of formally doing it last year. So as we get more familiar with the system, it'll be more natively understood, if you will.
But it would be accessible to the
Yes.
teachers
Yes.
across the board then?
There's a degree of access that I would have to investigate and tell you exactly what level different folks can have, because there's caseload access for the interventionists themselves, there's personal learning plan access, which I think everybody would be able to see, but I could find out for sure the level of exact access. I don't have that off the top of my head, I apologize. Nancy, do you know the answer?
Yes, they can, it rolls. The personal learning plans are set up so that it rolls, and it's almost ends up being a chapter, every year a chapter for a child if they were an intervention from elementary all the way through. It also helps staff to eliminate what has been tried in previous years and build upon that. So yes, the information can be accessed by if they're on the teacher's class list that year, they can have, they would have access to it.
That's the trick.
It's connected to their
Okay,
class
good,
list.
thanks.
Michelle?
What are the benchmark data sets that determine where a student is in a tier process?
Well, very similar to what, if I'm understanding your question correctly, when the behavioral side of things, we're sharing like the concept of kind of those tiers of what
Yes.
percent need to be served universal, and our expectation of a differentiated experience. We have limited capacity for intervention, so we have to determine, based on what staffing was approved, what percent of students we could serve. And so then we would take a look at a combination of things such as their STAR scores, their grades, how the PLP articulates where their learning needs are. So frankly, from school to school, there's gonna be a little variance on which students are in that 20% or 15% that would be served for intervention. But it's a look at a triangulation of data and a minimum of the STAR, the grades, teacher recommendation, and then once they get into an intervention evaluation piece at secondary, where they may not have had AVMR assessments done to determine, do we have a conceptual understanding issue, for instance, in math, or we would use some of those pieces to get an understanding of where is the learning need. Is it really a literacy learning need or a math learning need, or is there something else going on that would be looked at instead?
Rhonda?
So speaking of that, if there's something else that's going on, what's being done to help reduce the class size? And there's a potential impact on a class size. We've heard from students in situations, expulsion hearings, where they talked about class size was something that they mentioned. I did much better in a class when I didn't have as many people around. I was distracted. What is being done? You know, it's a level of support. Obviously, this whole thing is talking about multi-level systems of support, but what if in fact it actually is a class size issue?
All I can say is that my understanding is the staffing is done according to board policy and the recommendations that have been laid forth relative to that. So that's my understanding of that.
Right, we do have board policy and procedures as well as guidelines related to our staffing for our classes for secondary, as well as differentiated staffing related to our HER or hyper poverty schools at elementary, as well as regular staffing as well. So we have continued conversation at especially this time of year around how can we make sure we keep our class sizes as low as possible to meet those requirements without incurring additional costs for those class sizes. I think, again, when we've mentioned this as well, if we're looking at further reducing class size, that would be something that would be worth examination, but it would also be something that would be incredibly costly, and we would have to figure out what are multi-million-dollar reductions in other areas that would make up for those costs. If we're thinking about, in Michelle and I were talking about class size this morning, even just 2 people per building is, multi-million-dollar investment.
It's 84 FTEs.
Pardon?
84 FTEs.
Right, we said 80, right, exactly. So we just did the quick math. If we added two people per building, that's
On
84.
average.
Can you
84
actually say
people,
what
so
that
about
means
$4 million. Sure,
in
sure.
real terms for people that don't know what that is?
Yep. So let's just say the average teacher, basically the average teacher costs $70,000 to $75,000 with benefits. So if you have 41 schools and you're adding 2 teachers to that, you would multiply the 2 teachers by 75,000, so 150,000 per school times 41 schools or 42 schools would be I don't have my calculator, and I'm not good with math under pressure, but probably about $6 million.
42 times 700. I think
Go ahead, Michelle.
So
one of the things that is really, really, really apparent as I've been sitting on this Blue Ribbon Commission is that students who come to us may not have all the skills and resources and supports they need when they walk in the door. So they're always behind. And the factors that we have to put into place require additional resources around students of poverty, students who come with different needs that are much bigger than maybe students who come well prepared, who may not have the trauma or the social emotional challenges. And so we're in that fine balance right now. And I think that the state, as we have this discussion around with the Blue Ribbon Commission and other areas, is to really recognize that the Vincent v. Voigt legislation that was supposed to pass, where there was supposed to be additional compensation for students in poverty, students whose first language is not English, and special needs students, hasn't been met. And so there are some things as we look to class size. I've really spent a lot of time really reflecting on what it would really take to significantly reduce a class size across the district on average. And it's because of the magnitude of the size of our schools, or the number of our schools, we find ourselves in places where we have resources and additional resources. You know, and you'll see even in the literacy interventions how many additional support staff we have as interventionists and reading recovery teachers. And it's that balance, it really is, because right now, and I'm looking at John Cascia, but there's the pool of money is finite, and we can rearrange, but at the end of the day, are we, or do we have significant enough resources to meet what we're talking about in a systemic way that isn't always just trying to put all the pieces together as best we can with what we have. That's all.
Can I ask a question about the Blue Ribbon Commission?
Mhm.
What do they talk about in regards to class size? What's the conversation that's been had there?
I don't think there's been a lot of discussion. In fact, I don't recall any discussion around class size. It's more about resource, about individual students and what supports each child would need and deserve. And if a child is in need of small class size, that would be a need they have.
Well, I think most children would benefit from a smaller class size. There's no discussion on that there?
Not that particular piece. I think it's broader than that overall, just around student individual needs. But I'll go back through my notes, I have them, so.
So let's just take a class with 26 students and say we decide we'd like to split that into two. That gives us two classes of 13 students, which is great. Those students very well might add an additional track to that school that would carry on through kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade. And so the total, if you add $75,000 per year for those 6 years, would be $450,000. Not to say that that's not what we do, and it may be something we need to do in that particular situation, but it's something that we're careful about and don't take lightly. And I think what we need to do is, if we're going to examine class size ratios and look at doing something differently, again, the questions have to go beyond, it would have to be really, really significant changes in operation as far as the way our schools operated, benefits, things of that, looking at boundaries, things of that nature. Those are the multi-million-dollar cost savings pieces that if we're looking at reducing class size through that mechanism, it would be costly enough that it couldn't be taken care of by reducing a position someplace else. It would have to be something that was a mega scale study and piece. Not to say it's not worth doing. I think that there's value in examination.
Well, and the reason why I think it comes to mind is because I've heard students talk about it, that the students that were having behavior issues, they've mentioned that various times, and that's why it always comes to my mind. When's the last time the board actually reviewed class size caps and policies? Anyone?
We had a
This past June.
report last,
We-
summer.
In fact, I'm looking at the policy right now.
But I mean, prior to that, was
Revised
there
June
a
of
study done or
2018.
something?
2005.
Okay, that's what my question is.
Yeah. We're getting off topic here, but I do want to mention that even though we've got these guidelines, aside from going in and, and revising those ratios, those recommended sizes and ratios, principals and supervisors have always had the option to go to administration with requests to be outside of those, based on circumstance, and those things are really laid out there. It's described in the policy and in the rules, and that's, again, not new. That's been the case for, I mean, when I came in 1990, that was the case. If there were special circumstances, then it's incumbent on the principal to come forward to administration and say, this third grade class or this eighth grade language arts class or what have you.
We've had that.
Right.
Special circumstances. So that is within policy as well.
Thank you. In thinking about those special circumstances, if the student population remains the same, but we add staffing, that is actually a class size reduction effort. So in looking to Mr. Kasha over here, we have added some in staffing over the past few years, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but there have been multi-million-dollar additions to staffing over the past several years. I'm not sure this year. 26 new staff members. So 26 new staff members, additional staff members, despite a lower student population. So we are adding staff, and so that does change the staffing ratio. And particularly if we look at a lot of the situations are for students that are in challenging situation with maybe having special needs that need to be met. There was a deaf and hard of hearing interpreter position we just looked at, looking at additional positions for support for students with significant issues of autism and things of that nature, but then also looking at some of our schools that have deeper poverty and are working on situations trying to instruct students with bilingual needs. Those are areas that we really try and focus on when we have those multi-million-dollar additions. And if you multiply 26 times 75, that's probably 2 million-ish.
That's why I asked.
Yep, exactly. So we are adding quite a bit to staffing, which does change the ratio for the better.
Are those 26 positions classroom positions?
Many of them are.
Some.
I would say the vast majority, I would say, would be classroom positions or support positions that are related, like a paraprofessional or a deaf and hard of hearing person. It's not administration and things of that nature for the large part.
School counselor.
School counselors, social workers.
Thank you.
We'll have that list for
Yeah.
the public.
Okay.
Michelle?
Just as a follow-up, the conversation around school finance and the blue ribbon, when I think about it, class size is one strategy perhaps for some students to close gaps. It can be to accelerate learning. It can be a variety of things. So we've had a lot of conversation around closing gaps and accelerating learning for students in terms of resource needs. So I'll just put that out there as well for consideration.
Anyone else?
So considering from the elementary perspective, taking a look at our elementary literacy, Nancy?
Well, good evening and thank you. The presentation and data that I've brought forward this evening is a accumulation of a lot of professionals' work, not only in the teaching and learning department, but at the building, in our buildings, with our leadership in the buildings, also with our interventionists and coaches that do this heavy lifting and supporting at ground level every day. Not to mention the classroom teachers. The classroom teachers, the data that I'm going to speak to at this time, just a little bit about what's in the numbers. I asked that I have the data only for those schools and for those programs that are implementing our literacy program. And that means our reading units of study, our writing units of study, and our Words Their Way. And so that this is a clean measure that we'll be following over the next multiple years to watch the increase in these scores go up as far as proficiency, What I have noticed from last year to this year, is our data banks are really starting to correlate with our STAR resources, as well as our state assessment, which I cannot speak to tonight because it is still embargoed. But I hope to come back, I believe in January or November, that we have a literacy update coming. I'd like to address what I mean by that then. A little bit about this data. There's our district benchmark assessments and our reading assessments that we give at the district level 3 times a year. We give, actually this benchmark assessment we give every spring now, but we do conduct running records on students on a monthly basis. The other piece that we really emphasized this year was our writing units of study. It has been a curriculum that has been in the district, I want to say, for 7 years. And the units of study are being implemented in our schools. And this is also the area of focus in which Linda Teskey led the professional development with coaches and building principals around the data from the samples as the children were, students were finishing their on-demand writing. Their coaches and the principals were analyzing that data together to have a deep understanding of what those numbers really mean. The most important part of this is the coaches and the principals collaborated and actually together went through the classrooms, looked for, so they had their professional learning, and then went back to the classroom during that month, and in and out of classrooms, having the support of the coach for explicit instructional practices that we talked about, we looked at, we studied, and now to practice in the classroom. This is outstanding data, and I am confident that it's accurate. It's a very rigorous curriculum, very rigorous rubric children are measured against, but this is a team that's working collaboratively together. The teacher teaching it, the coaching supporting it, the principals knowing the look for, and supporting the whole cycle of learning. So it's very impressive, and we look to hold those numbers and maybe even increase them next year. The other piece of our data is our Words Their Way data, which measures our word study or spelling program for the older grades, and our Phonemic Awareness program for our K-2 as words develop through developmental literacy. Typically, and I'm going to just share with you a couple look-fors that we're going to really want to pay attention to over the next couple of years, is more of a balance between our reading, our writing, and our word study. As we know, they all work in unison in developing an early learner, an emergent learner in literacy. So we really do triangulate all 3 pieces of that data to see who has met the district benchmarks in all 3 components. Because again, they work intertwined with each other. The next piece is just a little bit about our support that we have in our schools. We're often asked about our coaches and what our coaches do in the schools. We have some data that 400 hours is our coaches actually teach in a classroom half day, and they are developing and learning themselves so they can go out and coach teachers around the literacy framework. So the observation classroom is about 400 hours a year of their own embedded professional learning. We are flexible with that for schools that need additional teacher to coach cycles. Then that's at the discretion of the building principal to allocate that time so that the coach can do more intensive work with individuals that need that. The other piece is the professional learning hours. Those are outside of the coaching cycles. That would be your face-to-face monthly meetings, and that was 33 hours last year, and it's up to 106 this year. Coaching cycles, 86 cycles on average for each coach. We had 25 literacy coaches, and our records indicate 2,138 completed coaching cycles, and that is significantly up from last year. Noting that our first-year coaches do not coach in a coaching cycle. It's their year of learning. Goal for next year, as pointed out by Mrs. Teskey and our literacy team, is we are taking our coaching model to year 4 now, which means we're beyond the coach teaching the school, and we're to the coach working with the individual teacher. So you'll see an increase, even more so, of coaching cycles, because it's more of a one-on-one teacher to coach, and that's the point in your coaching framework that you want to get to, because research supports that that is where you get your greatest student achievement and closing the gaps when the coach is working directly with the teacher. Now we're going to just move to Tier 1 and MLSS for math. Yes.
Just a follow-up to that, Nancy, and your data are showing that you're seeing that exactly what the research would tell you as the coach and the teacher, and you're seeing that as you look across the data. We talk about process a lot, but I just want to make sure the confidence in the data is showing what you would expect.
And we look at that in the work we do as incremental gains. Yes, we all want to see it happen faster.
Mm-hmm.
But what we are seeing in the schools is we are seeing the implementation of the framework with intentionality, and we're also seeing the coach work with the principals, but also with the classroom teacher in a very supportive manner and around the students. So when you would go in and watch a coaching cycle, we're absolutely seeing intentional teaching and intentional guidance. Teacher goes back in, then tries it, the coach then follows through with it to ensure that that lift is happening. It's also as part of our intervention, multi-level systems of support. Before a student would be recommended for a Tier 2 intervention, the teacher in the classroom must have coaching cycles to rule out that it isn't an instructional piece, and it's not an instructional issue that's causing the deficit, but rather that the child is not making those connections and gains as desired. So I think that's very important as it's built in. We really rely on the coach to go in and to justify that the framework is being implemented as designed. Did I answer your question, Dr. Langenfeld?
I have more questions, but I'll hold for now. Thanks.
Go ahead, Andrew.
So for this to work, it's essential then, if we're going to say that we're not going to, we're going to have the coach come in first to make sure it's not instructional coaching that's needed for the teacher before we're going to do some kind of greater intervention.
It's a part of, there are multiple components prior to a child being referred so that we go to our learning support team first for a tier, just to discuss what's going on in the classroom. And that's one option that is addressed to rule out that it might not be an instructional piece. It might be something that we're missing. But that's where the coach would go in and support that literacy component. It's not the end-all be-all, but it definitely is something that is considered and addressed prior to.
Okay, in every case, or virtually every case?
I could not speak to that, as learning support team meetings are held at the building level, and the notes are then documented within the student's personal learning plan. But that is what it's written, and that is the guidance that we have provided.
Yeah, so I guess what I'm getting to is the, if we have do we run into situations where we have a process that is researched and data-driven and good, but not fast enough to get the student what they need? I mean, this is, I've met our coaches. We have good, good coaches. We have a good coaching system. Are there always enough coaching slots to go around where they're needed? Because if not, then we have to have a serious discussion about if that's the right model, and I'm not saying it isn't, but then, do we need 2 more? Do we need 4 more? Do we not need any more? Because when teachers need the coach, when this coach has to be inserted to see if the kid needs the additional tier, how are we doing with that? 'Cause that we really, my opinion individually is if this system gets the coach in and gets a timely intervention for 90% of kids, and so it would take 6 more coaches to make that virtually 100, then I guess I'd want to probably do that.
So the very first thing we do, and that's an excellent question, is the observation classroom. The coach, then the classroom teacher teaches the literacy block. If there is an observation that needs to be done because a child is going to a referral or going to a tier 2 learning support team
So
meeting.
are there enough coaches to cover those situations? Because there's, obviously, there's a lot of these situations,
Right.
and there's not unlimited coaches.
I think, in my opinion, we have a good model of coaching support for our literacy instruction here. It's one that's looked upon by other districts and envied by many. I would say the one area related is not necessarily a lack of coaches, but probably a lack of interventionists. We have quite a few interventionists, and we have what would also be considered good programming, but when we look at the high number of kids that are not proficient yet, that are not successful to the level that we'd like, we're not intervening with everybody who could use that support. So if you think of a hospital room, there are kids that need to be, we triage, but there are kids that definitely could use more support from intervention. But we have to be really mindful too of the cost as well. When I was mentioning the other piece, I want every student to be able to be successful, and the further behind they slip, the harder it is for us to catch up with them. And when we talk about the next steps for us departmentally, a big focus is on phonemic awareness at the early levels, as well as support for programming in general through the workshop process. So it's not just about the universal support through programming here, it's about how are we affecting the kids coming in, how are we making sure every kid has access to 4K and high quality 4K. So those are elements that are important as well.
And I'd like to add that our particular framework for literacy is very much differentiated and has the potential to meet all students' needs within the classroom. Our first focus needs to be on strengthening our universal. Their first instruction, and John kind of led to a couple slides that will be coming up. What we have found in our research, or our data and our monitoring of our data, in our observation and noticing, is some potential needs that not everything is being taught. Not everything is being taught with Fidelity, but also that we have to take a much closer look at our achievement gap of children coming in from 4K to kindergarten, and closely monitor. And I'll get to that in just a couple of slides.
Another important element that's not really a main focus of this is some of the work we're doing in reforming our bilingual education efforts. That is a gap area that we have, and we're making sure that our universal quality of instruction for our bilingual students is mirroring best practices that we see through workshop as well. That's something that's being openly and happily received by our principals, and will begin to show payoff with our second language learners as well.
So I guess my timed out, it worked. The next piece I just would like to quickly touch on would be our Advantage Math Recovery Assessment. This Advantage Math Recovery Assessment, we're in our second year of a full implementation, and that's why you might see in the next slide 2 different assessments given. This particular data gives teachers and principals really specific diagnostic learning behavior data, so that teachers know where to go in and to actually address where there might be a gap. So they not only have STAR assessment that's the screener, but this gets into the specific behavior students are learning, using to learn around math. And it absolutely correlates and aligns with our new adoption of Bridges. So next year we'll have multiple pieces of data. Right now this is the consistent benchmark that we use. Knowing that all the sub-tests, every grade is given just a sub-test, not the full battery. Yes?
Do these percentages include all of our elementary
They do,
kids? So-
because all of our, thank you, because all of our children are involved in our math curriculum. It's just the literacy curriculum that is broken apart. Da Vinci is not included in this data.
Okay. So it's got our Bridges pilot schools and then all the other schools?
It has all of our programs, yes, absolutely. There are 9, as you're aware, because you approved these last spring. There are 9 Bridges trainers who are available to multiple sites throughout the district to help with the implementation of Bridges in mathematics. And our primary focus, again, is our universal. We also have, and they aren't 9 plus 18, because the 9 Bridges trainers are also part of the 18 interventionists. So that's just 9 bodies, but they're at 0.5 for training. And then our math interventionists, we have 18 math interventionists who are trained to support teachers in administering and analyzing Advantage Math, the Advantage Math Recovery Assessment. And their primary focus for the interventionists then is intervention. So the trainers' focus in supporting would be the classroom, and the interventionist focus is supporting teachers around the AVMR assessment and intervention. Okay. At elementary literacy, Tier 2, we had 571 interventions that were administered over the past year. Less than the percentage making less than 1 year's growth, 48%, with 52% making 1 year or more growth while they're in that intervention. We have 28 total interventionists. It's a little deceitful up there that 24 of the 28 are full-time reading recovery trained teachers and interventionists. 2 of the 28 are not reading recovery trained, and a 0.5 interventionist only. And then 1 is a 0.5 reading recovery only, and 1 is a reading recovery interventionist. So a 0.3. So we have multiple makeups of those that are trained and have chosen not to be trained because of their part-time status in reading recovery. The next piece that I'm bringing forward is actually reading recovery. It is the body of data that we have the most data on. It was the only intervention prior to the beginning of MLSS that we had for literacy for grade 1 students. Discontinue successfully. You want to discontinue, that's a positive thing. We have serviced 53 students, and 26% of those 53 students discontinued successfully. Often reading recovery can take up to 20 weeks. I think it's an important stat to look at, that 79% of those students in reading recovery actually exit prior to the 20-week cap that you usually have for a student in reading recovery. About 11 students took the entire 20 weeks for their intervention. 80 of these students, of the 203, were recommended to go on to additional intervention. This is a stat for the incomplete program that we've been working on the last 3 years intensively, is trying to get in 2 rounds when we have 36 weeks of school. And so in order to get for it to be completed, then we have to count 20 weeks of each round. And depending on when students exit and come in, we want to make sure that we're monitoring how many students had a full complete program, because this will stay on the record as we monitor their progress through their elementary years. And then we had 10 students that moved during the program and 3 students that did not, none of the above criteria met. An important part I would like to address about reading recovery, and something that we have uncovered in our data, is our phonemic awareness. And even students in reading recovery, which is an extremely intensive intervention, we have some concerns that is already a weakness. And so one recommendation that we are going to be making, or actually implementing this year, we'll be monitoring our kindergarten students very closely. and then assessing them in January for those students who are not making progress in reading right away in their area of phonemic awareness. At this time, Liz Armstrong is looking at DRA2. It's an assessment we have. It's an assessment that we're aware of and using, but also we also use the early literacy reading survey, which gets more specific as to exactly what sounds and what letters students know. What we're hoping here then is to provide an intervention at kindergarten in January. We want to make sure our kindergarten students have the, we want to make sure students kindergarten have the accessibility to the rich kindergarten environment before we're pulling them out of universal for an intervention. We're hoping with that, our reading recovery success rates will even be greater. Math 2 intervention, we served 447 students. The number of students who received math recovery, 132. The percentage of students that made 1 year growth or more during their cycle of intervention were 73% of our students. The percentage of students who made a 0.5 year growth during the cycle, 21%. And the percentage of students that made less than a 0.5 years growth is 6%. We also served, we used Advantage Math Recovery as our Tier 2 intervention, and we serviced 315 students with that intervention. Tier 3 intervention, this is an area, did I miss one?
No, so just, sorry.
Okay. This is Tier 3 intervention, is an area that is it's our Tier 3. That means students have gone through a Tier 1 intervention intensively in the universal, then have gone through a Tier 2 intervention, and we're not closing the gap as quickly as we desire. So students may be referred for a Tier 3 intervention. At this time is when our school psychologists become involved, so that we don't have to stop the intervention process if a student were to need special education. This is just built in the process. However, that is not the intent of Tier 3. The intent of Tier 3 is to close the gap and get the child back into Tier 2. Our Tier 3 interventions are very skill specific, and we had 92 of these students that were referred for special education in Tier 3, where 57% of the students actually were identified and placed. And then students referral for special education and math were 26, and students, and that referral and placement rate is 69. And you might ask, well, why is that important? It's important because of not only the amount of resource, but we have to ask ourselves, are we meeting the individual needs of students? Are we exhausting all efforts before moving them to the next level, and often districts call it a Tier 4, but moving them to special education, and where they need an even more intensive intervention that extends over at least 1 year's period of time. So it's a two-way system. We want to make sure that we are giving children every opportunity to get back to the universal and work backwards in the MLSS process, as well as making sure that students that are in special education are the students who truly need that level of service. 24 of our 28 elementary schools have implemented our reading and writing. Just a little bit about some fun facts here. Word study and components of our framework. Classroom teachers are all trained in Advantage Math Recovery. That is something to be extremely proud of. We are the envy of nearly every math concert that we attend, or conference we attend, as well as professional development, that our teachers have this rich foundation, and the transition then into Bridges is going to be so much, I don't want to say easier because it's a very intense, but more, it's going to make the transition into Bridges much more comfortable for them. Also, Bridges in Mathematics Workshop in Academies. We've been working on this all summer long from our Principal Academy that kicked off in June. right till the startup of school. In fact, tomorrow we are going to have a district office training on how to support schools in the implementation of bridges. And so that we all have a role to play in this, and a very important and specific role to making sure that this is successful. And the last but not least, our Bridges Intervention Workshop was attended by not only all of our district math interventionists, but also by every special education teacher, including secondary, in our district. So just that foundational practices and theory of learning and taking on numeracy, a very solid foundation that we now have common language to work from. Oops, not thank you, I have one more. Sorry, it doesn't want me to say it.
Lori, can you go ahead one more, please?
Thank you. So our next steps, as John alluded to, there's a team of us and a board member in the room that has so kindly worked with us on this team, just as not as a board member, but as support. We've been reviewing phonological awareness pre-K programs and resources. As part of that work, we'll also be looking at the assessment and a more, shall I say, detailed assessment. We have assessments to let us know if students are in a band, but we're not a band, which means like in words their way. It's a scale or a band of scores where students lie. When you're doing this intensive work in the primary years, we need to know exactly what sounds and letters that children know and to what level they know, so that if they don't know it, that we give it when the child moves to the next grade level, they know where to pick it up. Our goal is to close it by second grade, that they have what they need as the foundation of learning literacy. We have selected 7 teachers. Actually, they have volunteered in our pre-K program that we will be implementing 2 different resources this fall, and they are going to be field testing the resources to see if they're doable, if they will work in Green Bay, if it's the right fit for Green Bay. And then our core team will be meeting and looking over the data, observing the implementation, and making a decision hopefully by January to bring forward to you a recommendation for a phonemic awareness program in our pre-K level. We also are going to, I already mentioned that we're going to be providing the kindergarten students phonological awareness intervention, specifically to phonological awareness, beginning in January. And we also will be preparing a recommendation, as I just mentioned, by February would be our goal to have to use, so that at the start of next year, every pre-K classroom will have a comprehensive phonological program in place, and teachers trained to implement that. We are requiring coaching cycles for all classroom teachers, and also the implementation of bridges in mathematics. And this is the important piece I was alluding to. When we really dug into our Tier 3 interventions, we're to the point now that we would like to identify which of our Tier 3 interventions are working the best for our children in Green Bay. Also, it helps us to determine where we might have holes in our programming, our literacy programming. So you use the MLSS system as a check and balance to know what you're missing in your universal also. So you use the host system to work towards developing that comprehensive learner in literacy and numeracy. And now I'll field any questions.
Anybody? Well, thank you very much then. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So along with that, if there are additional questions, please feel free to contact anybody here, but most importantly, we'd like you to contact myself or Ms. Byer. Thank you, and have a good night.
Thank you.
Yes.
All right. Next, we'll move to our superintendent's update. I'll turn that over to Dr. Langenfeld.
Thank you. We have a number of things. I'd like to begin with the monthly calendar. Beginning September 3rd, the district building is closed for Labor Day. September 4th, we welcome our students to the 2018-19 school year, and we celebrate always their first day of school. And certainly I expect that people will be out and about in schools as well, board members and myself and others as well, to welcome and greet our students along with wonderful staff and administrators as well. We have a special board meeting on September 10th at 5:15. Immediately following that, the teaching and learning work session at 5:30, and the organizational support work session immediately following that as well. All here in room 331 in the school board room on Broadway. And then September 17th is the regular board meeting that begins at 5:30. So that is the calendar. At this point, I have a number of things for discussion, and the first one is an update on the community schools. And so I would like to invite Kim Shannock and Principal Amy Kay from House School to talk to us about where they are at in the process of the community school opportunity at House School. And I was going to take the risk, and then I went for Principal Kay.
Oh, we know it's Calgaden, but Kay is good.
Yeah. So.
Hi, I'm Amy Klein. I'm the principal at Howell Elementary School. So I think to start out, I would like to just talk about how excited I am about the opportunity to become a community school. I started my career out as a high school teacher, and I worked with special education students, and a lot of the times throughout that process, I would think to myself, what if that could have been sooner? What if I could have met them sooner? How could we have done this before? And I think really through some of the work we've done, we went to the National Community Schools Conference, and all I could think about when they talked about the concepts of community schools and reducing barriers for kids and involving the community and strengthening not only like removing barriers for kids, but strengthening the supports for families and communities and really creating stronger neighborhoods, all I could think of is how could we not do that? How could we not? So I think I said a little bit. So really what the concept of a community school is to be a neighborhood hub that not only the kids can access, but the families, the neighbors, the community, like the businesses around, can all come together to work to reduce barriers that we all know impact kids' learning when they come to us. I heard you guys talk earlier about, we all know kids don't come to us with the same slate, right? They don't come to us with all the same our early learning. So really, community schools enriches early childhood programs all the way through. And I think really the goal is to give kids an equitable start and be able to help them reduce the barriers and have access to the education that they need and that they deserve. So far we have done a lot of, we're really still in the planning and exploring stage, but we've done a lot of research. We were able to, I was lucky enough to be able to go to the National Community Schools Convention. Through that, I was able to connect with community schools in Chicago, within Wisconsin, some within New York. So you're able to get like a really broad perspective of the way that community schools can run in different communities. So we have been working with United Way, and they have done a lot of research. So we've done a lot of looking at what different models can be used. And so the United Way will be our anchor partner. So they are going to be the overarching, and when we figure everything out, they're the ones that help stay consistent and develop the partnerships throughout when we expand. Our lead partner is a natural step. We have the How Resource Center that is right within our parking lot. So a lot of the opportunities that you would want to be able to provide with a community school, we have either starts of them or a really good connection to be able to build some of that. Within the next year, we are hoping to look at how to hire a community school site coordinator. And that's the one thing in common that you can see in all the models, that they have a community school site coordinator. And really to develop the job responsibilities and to be able to put that out. So at where we are in the next steps are, we did a needs assessment for our staff at the end of the school year. So we sat and had like roundtable discussions so we could really talk about not just the needs, but what the strength of the school that they saw, what the strengths of the surrounding community, and then what needs that they saw and what needs they saw for our students and our families. And then the next step, we will do a needs assessment with our families, and then we will partner with some neighbors so that we get their input. And then we're given a list now, so we're going to see what businesses and like churches, the surrounding, within our surrounding area that want to participate in a needs assessment too, to see not only what they need, but then go that strength base and what they have to offer for to support us. Because what I found so far is people are so willing and really invested in trying to help. So that is our next step. And then we are having a community block party. So it's our first one. So on August 30th, when we do our back to school days, we have a number of community organizations coming in. We have barbers that are going to come in and give free back to school haircuts. We have some fun stuff for the kids like bounce houses and dunk tanks. Just so a really good event that is not only for our school and our kids, but for the surrounding community and the neighbors. And we have some live music. So we're really excited to try something to have a really cool start to, or like a kickoff for our back to the school year. And I guess at the end of the day is that we are able to, by having a community school and by focusing young, it's really about how we can do some of that preventative work, how we can give them a good start. And when I think about the whole scope of how they look in middle school and high school with the community school, we're able to like change their narrative, right? We can help change their story so that the barriers that they have no control over no longer have such a deep impact for them.
So I'm Kim Shianak, and my role in this is that I'm facilitating the process by which we roll this out at Howe in partnership with United Way and the Community Resource Center. The main way that I do my job is to support our principals, and you can see what a pleasure and a joy that would be in this particular instance. So this is a very fun thing to be working together on.
Go ahead. I think one of the things that, first of all, I know that Amy, you have done just an incredible job, and I think the fit is so wonderful, knowing and going back and listening to the history of how school and how Community Resource Center was, and Mr. Dorff was the principal, and Katie was
a screaming mother.
Yeah, supportive mother. But I think there's a synergy around this, again, that renewed effort and energy. I know that the board for the Resource Center is very supportive as well, and the team working forward. One of the things I did want to share, the United Way is the anchor partner, and they're doing a shift in terms of how they resource the funds that people donate. Originally 94% of their monies would go to like single entities, and now their set aside is about 45% of their funding moving forward will be to support things like, that have greater impact on the community, like a community school is one of their areas of support. What that does, though, and I know that Brenda, you received a letter from the United Way saying that some of these individual grants that different grantees received, such as for us, it's the McKinney-Vento grant, we will need to apply for that in the spring again and see where it fits in this particular effort. So they are reducing the individual grants, but at the same time opening up to a broader granting process. So I don't know where that's going to land, and we have to have more conversation around what that McKinney-Vento grant would do if we didn't receive it. But at the same time, we also have this shift around really being able to leverage at a broader level the resources around a community-based and neighborhood outreach kind of effort. And I think that this is a conversation I have to share with you that we've had for a very long time around the resources for building community spaces. But the true community school that you start to see the research around that says it will transform a community or really shift everything to just really hug that school and support it and see increased student achievement. Really excited where it's going to as well, and I'm grateful.
other questions or comments?
Thank you.
Thank you for all your work.
She is a rock star principal. I don't know who found it, but.
You both are.
That's true. That's true. Security grant update is the next item, and I'd like to invite Chris Collar.
Hello, everyone. So I'm going to present an update to the security grant. For some of you who may not be aware, the second round of grant funding has been released. This round of funding was awarded on a per student basis, roughly $55.21 per student. Green Bay School District is eligible for $1.140840 million. What we are planning to do with that is to look to put window film in all of our schools on the exterior doors. We are looking to potentially put a secure entrance in Minoka Hill. We are looking to add potentially more security cameras as we have done in the first round to try to make sure that we've got all of our camera needs met. Along with, there's another training component that is required under the second round of grant funding. And this training component allows us to use grant funding to either pay for our staff to attend the training or for us to find substitutes to cover the classrooms while our staff is in the training, along with some other requirements. So I'm diligently working on putting all of those things together. And unfortunately, the grant closes on August 30th, so the next time the board meets, it will already have been submitted. And the plan is to try to put in for every penny that we can and utilize as much of the funding as possible.
Okay.
Any questions about it?
Did they make it more user-friendly so you were basically able to use the same framework or grant process?
They did make it user-friendly. They provided some templates of documents.
Okay.
Unfortunately, they did ask for quotes again, so you still need to be able to put numbers into the system to make it work. So a lot of it we've had already from the first round, and there's some other components that are new that I'm working on getting estimates and quotes for, and putting the numbers in to get us to the right mathematical equation to give us as much money as we can.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for your
Thank
efforts
you.
on that.
Well, good. Thanks, Chris.
Yep, thank you. The next item is the videotaping equipment for the boardroom. Lori will join us. She got a quote or information from CISA.
So in your board packet on Friday, Michelle provided the information that I had pulled together. I don't know if you want me to go through it or if you just had any questions.
You hit the highlights of it.
Okay. So basically where we're at is that the cameras that are currently around us, CISA has really determined that they're really kind of at their end of their life. And so those are CISA's equipment. The big box back there is our equipment as well as the microphones, and then all of the stuff that we can't see behind the walls that makes it all operate. All of that is also really at the end of its life. So where CISA's at is they are not interested in purchasing new equipment to continue to videotape the board meetings. So it kind of puts us on a couple different options. One, we can go out for RFP and see if someone else would like to do that. I think what we would need to know in putting the RFP together is, are you looking for the same setup? So the current setup allows who's ever operating the cameras to switch to have the speaker be on the camera, so you can see that versus just one camera in the back that would just have a shot of the whole room. So if you want something similar to that, obviously the RFP would require that the firm or individual that was going to do the work would have to have some kind of backup, so if they were sick or whatever, that the board meeting could continue to be videotaped. There are some, if we were looking to upgrade, there would be some things that would be definitely nice to have, which would be microphones that either automatically turn on and off based on who's speaking, or ones where you actually press it on when you want to talk. That would just make it easier for the closed captioning to work because it wouldn't be picking up multiple noises and it just picks up from the speaker that's talking. One option that CISA did look into, is just very preliminary, was if we wanted to look at more permanent video equipment in this room. Some of the concerns that I have with that is just that this is a multi-purpose space, so we'd almost need to have like tape on the floor just to make sure the tables and stuff are always lined up, to make sure the cameras and the where the tables were situated, so you've got one in the view, what you wanted in the view, right? The one nice part about moving to something like that, not the cost, it's very costly. You're looking at between $70,000 to maybe $90,000 investment. But the nice part about that is that in that situation, the cameras can be operated by a laptop, and so that could really mean that we could actually train staff internally to be able to provide that service for us. So that's kind of where we're at, is, we have got a couple options we could look at. We won't really know. Right now we're paying CISA $10,000 a year to do the 2 board meetings, as well as the 4 graduations, and then the budget meeting in November. We really wouldn't have any idea kind of where other organizations would come in for costs until we'd go up for an RFP process, so.
Andrew?
Okay, so is there a reason that we would have to leave, CISA's services, does that have to stay locked to CISA's equipment, or not necessarily?
Well, I'm not sure I understood the question. So they've basically said they feel like the equipment is at the end of life.
Their equipment.
Their equipment. Okay. As well as our equipment, the mixer, things like that. And, we've talked about investing in a better mixer. I think one of the things we'd like to eliminate is sometimes it can be disruptive when the media feels it has to keep moving its microphones around, and having a mixer where they could just plug in the back and get their sound would be an upgrade for us. So that's one of the things we would like to consider in purchasing a new mixer. So my understanding, I sat down and really tried to understand from Dean's perspective what they were thinking, and they felt like the equipment's, they've fixed it once, or done some service to it already. It's kind of at the point where it's not worth continuing to invest in it. But they're also not interested in the cost for them to purchase equipment, because this camera equipment stays only here. They don't use it for any other purpose than us. Where for graduation, the difference there is they have some very high-end video equipment that they use for graduation, and because that's a couple-hour thing on it 4 times a year, they use their equipment for that they also use for other purposes. So that's kind of where we're at. This has been probably investment made quite some time ago for the district, and as they provide this service, and at this point they're just sort of at the point where they don't want to make that investment again.
Rhoda?
So it's fair to say then, if they want to continue providing the service, they would have to use the equipment that they have.
Well, I think as a board you could decide if you wanted to continue to use the current equipment, right? I didn't ask Dean if the board decided they didn't want to upgrade the equipment, if they would continue or not. I'm not sure. That was just sort of what their recommendation is. We need new equipment.
But it seems like they would not, if they're going to continue, they'll continue with whatever we decide on equipment.
Well, so we're good for this year. For
Right.
this school year, we're good. So this would be the following school year.
So their contract goes through this year?
Through this year, correct. Yep. Yep. So we would just have to have a plan, which is, I think, why we wanted to bring this soon enough, because if we were going to look at the more permanent equipment, or look at having to go off to for RFP, that we have enough time to sort of put that information together so that we can look at that early enough, so when we do budgeting in the winter months, we have that information for that purpose.
I'm going to call myself quick. If we buy equipment that's not permanent, who would be running that equipment? You mentioned if we have permanent equipment, we could train our own staff. Can we train our own staff to run non-permanent equipment if that's what we purchase? Or who would do that, I guess?
Well, so I'm not sure. I mean, I think we'd have to make that decision if that's something we wanted to do, as far as have someone trained to run the video equipment. My understanding, and I don't express to be an expert on video cameras, but my understanding is that the part about the permanent cameras that was made it easier for someone who didn't necessarily have that background is that it's through a laptop. You can kind of switch switch to camera 1, switch to camera 2, because you would have multiple permanent cameras set in place so that you're getting the same, multiple perspective that we currently have with the camera setup.
Katie and then Andrew.
Can I just ask our AV guy right back there, Jeff, are you controlling this with a laptop?
No.
No, okay.
Recording it on a laptop, yes.
Okay.
But it's controlled via the equipment in this
That big old thing, okay.
The ancient equipment in this box.
Treat it gently, please. If we were to go for an RFP, would it be that we would expect people to bring the
Yes.
equipment, or we would, okay.
Well, it could be either, but so in my opinion, it would be if you're going to look at non-permanent equipment, then you may want to have that be brought by the organization that would be doing that, just like the current setup is, because that would be. Either way, the cameras are a big investment, right, for us, because we don't currently own cameras. This would be a new purchase for us.
Right.
So that would be my thought, is that would be what would be in the RFP, is that they would be providing potentially the equipment. The microphones, again, excuse me?
Including the mixer, or?
Well, I think we should purchase a mixer. As I stated, I think there's some value to that, just in minimizing board disruption, because then when media come, they can just hook right up to that mixer for their sound purposes.
What's the likelihood that we, if I can just extend mine a little bit, if we even got the more portable cameras and a new mixer, that we could actually train someone to?
I don't have that information.
Okay.
I mean, we'd have to look into it. We'd have to look into what kind of training would our staff
that might
need.
increase our flexibility with to use.
Yeah. Andrew?
Okay, so two things. First of all, I am pretty confident that we could get decent equipment to replace this old equipment and do everything we would want to do in a board meeting, plus more, for well under $10,000, well under that. And I base that off of what I have in my line of work, what I've trained people to do working for nonprofits who have maybe not a huge budget. They've I'm not gonna say the brand, because I don't know if I really recommend that brand, but as far as like a representative price point, what you can do with $1,000 or $1,500 setup, it has user movable remote control. It accommodates multiple cameras, but I'm thinking of what just can be done with one camera, which could probably already probably exceed the video quality that we have here. Not speaking to the operator, speaking of the video quality itself with the older cameras. So I think we could get a couple of things that would probably look similar to this and cover us pretty well, and get a new mixer for well under $10,000 and be able to use it for much more than just board meetings. And I think that would be a good investment, and we could probably keep, we certainly could train internal staff, or if we decide, obviously, it would be a lower negotiated price, because we'd be having the services of an assistant, but not the use of the equipment. Weigh that versus training our own staff, but they've certainly become much more user-friendly to operate. So that's the first thing I would say, is I think we can do way less than that, getting quality portable equipment that I don't think you have to get too worried about tape on the floors and being that specific, because it's a pretty user-friendly kind of thing. But the other thing I'm wondering is, do we not have do we have other rooms that are more equipped for AV now, that if we just did the board meeting there instead, would be able to meet our needs?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, I think of the only rooms that'd probably be as big as this room would be our professional development rooms on second or first floor.
That's kind of what I was thinking.
Yeah, and I think, I'd have to check with Diane, but I think they have a similar setup to this room where they have the computer equipment that can go to the screen, but I don't know if there's any of them have a sound system. Does any of those? I don't think any of them have a speaker, but we don't have like a long distance room where, you know, they have the mics from the ceilings and they can kind of pick up from different areas of the room. We don't have anything like that set up here in the district office.
Which brings up another question that should be worked into this discussion too then, I think, is that a true long distance classroom kind of setup? Is that maybe something we should have? And maybe the answer is no, we shouldn't have it here, but it should be several of them out in the buildings. Maybe that's the answer, but it seems like that would be, for all the things we might do from the district, would we maybe want to have a full service, a full service interactive wired classroom might be a good thing to just have in our back pocket for when we need it, but I guess that's a...
Yeah, so I was just going to say, I know that there's been concern brought up too that when we do have, you know, folks that are here at the board meeting, the one screen is not, you know, legible for people who are sitting in the back. And so we don't really have we don't really have a way to make that function very well. Like, we've tried having a large TV back there, but it's not a permanent structure, so it's something that, you know, it'd be brought in and brought out. So, you know, I don't know if those are things the board would like us to look into further. Again, those are expenses, but we could come forward with, you know, maybe bring in a Camera Corner or another organization who has, you know, I believe Camera Corner has done the city of Green Bay's, and I think they've done, I forget the school district, another school district where they've, you know, done some of that camera, mic, you know, those kinds of things, and could kind of get a sense of, you know, what they see as maybe the most best value for the board in order to accomplish what you're trying to do.
I really think that's the way to go, to bring in a consultant like Camera Corner. You know, we know what we want. We want the meetings recorded. We want the videotape. We want good sound. We want to be able to, anything we show on there should be accessible, not just to the people here who are coming to the meeting, but clearly accessible to the people who are viewing it after the fact. So, you know, I think, speaking for myself, and it sounds like the rest of us here too, we're out of our depth in this, and we need somebody to come in who knows this business, and you know, we can explain, these are the kinds of things we're looking for. What can you do for us, or what can you recommend?
Yeah, and so that was one of the things that Dean had mentioned too with the permanent cameras, is that whatever the software package that comes with us has the ability to incorporate the slides into the meeting. So right now all they can do is take a camera shot of, you know, not always a very high resolution screen, right? And so you'd actually have a much better visual of actually what was being presented at the board table. So I'm happy to connect with them, and at least, you know, I mean, not necessarily to the point of a full proposal, but maybe just to kind of give us some sense of, you know, what would they recommend as far as, and then you could always go out for RFP for the full proposal if you wanted to do that, seeing as how there's probably significant cost involved.
I think that makes sense.
So I'm thinking at this point the request to them is going to be cameras, sound system, what upgrades do we maybe need to do to our internal system here in the room to ensure that we're getting good sound quality, as well as it's really effective for our closed captioning, and then what other things could we add to ensure that people have viewable access of the screen material in the second portion of the room. Does that sound like it covers the bases? Okay, all right, sounds good.
All right, thanks,
And
Lori.
then you're gonna do a motion later, so I'll do these other updates first,
Yeah,
or how
just
did you?
go ahead.
Okay,
Yep,
all
go in
right.
order.
I just want to move ahead. Couple of more updates before we get to the last item in my report. One of the things I wanted to just share with you, and it really goes with the convocation, all staff will be invited to participate in a convocation in one of the quadrants beginning on next week. Monday, we welcome Southwest High School will be at from 7:30 to 9:30, Tuesday at West, Wednesday at Preble, and Thursday at East. And throughout that process, one of the key components that we'll be sharing with and talking about is really the whole notion of through-line accountability, starting with the board's strategic roadmap and mission, vision, and core values. And I think one of the things that is really important as we move forward is really talking with the staff, not only about the metrics themselves, but more importantly, how do they fit in? Because with through-line accountability, we're really taking the board's strategic roadmap and saying, okay, here are our priorities around academic excellence, personalized pathways, engagement, and thriving workforce. Here are our key core values of engagement, excellence, and equity. What is my role? How do I contribute so that when that clear line of accountability from the Board of Education to student achievement goals, where do I fit in this process? So we will be talking about that collectively and talking about some of the key metrics that we're going to land on, as well as embedding it in our core values and district priorities. So I wanted that just to share out there to let the board know and to let the community know that we do have specific targets and goals and milestones that we'll be measuring and moving forward based on the board's expectations of accountability and the recognition that student achievement is our #1 priority in our work. So just catch you up with that. And I know that Sandy and I talked briefly earlier, and if you are planning, in addition to that, we would welcome and invite the board to not only be present, but if you'd like to speak and talk about that role, absolutely, we would love that as well, the role of the board. So if you would let Sandy know your availability so we could make sure.
I think, Ed, you're planning to go to all 4?
I was planning to.
Okay,
Excellent.
and you're planning to speak then at all 4 too, yeah.
Excellent, okay,
I
then we've
think
got
Ed
that
will be our
covered.
speaker, so if anybody else, but if anybody else wants to, I mean, if you want to speak, you can lobby with Ed. But otherwise, let Sandy know if you're able to attend any of those, just so we know who's coming.
Perfect, thank you.
I won't write any checks we can't cash, I promise.
All right.
I think the staff will really appreciate that, so thank you. The other 2 items I have, one of them is the Urban Leadership Institute, and I know I've shared some things with the board around the Leadership Institute, which is the state of Wisconsin and the largest school districts, Green Bay, Kenosha, Madison, Milwaukee, and Racine. And I just really wanted our community to recognize that this particular leadership opportunity to support our principals is really bringing principals in a collaborative kind of learning environment focused on 2 primary things: social and emotional development of all students who come to school, and also the improvement of academic outcomes. So the courses, or the framework of this, it's set up like a course almost. There's different increments of training, really looking at equity and what do I need to do as a leader around discovering not only my own self, but how do I bring people along in the journey. That whole piece around cultural competence, building a culture of excellence and equity in my schools, and then really looking at, are my improvement plan goals and the strategies that we're using giving us the results that we really need. Because equity really, as I know that the team has brought it forward, the state of Wisconsin is really focused in on equity as the pathway to proficiency. It's about equity, access, and opportunity. So I want to put that out there. We have a cohort of 5 that will start the training, but I know that the state of Wisconsin is very, very interested in providing and sustaining this particular effort. The dollars initially were through the Wallace Foundation and as part of the reauthorization of No Child Left Behind, or the ESSA. So we expect that we will see much more to come on that as well, but very hopeful about where this will be. There's been a lot of work behind the scenes to put this together. It's taken a while. There will be a statewide announcement of it coming up in September.
When will that training start?
The training will start, I think the first one is, the first get to know one another is in September, and then I believe I have the whole.
Who are the 5? Have you finalized that list?
I'm looking, there's, the executive directors are working on that right now.
Okay, so it hasn't been finalized.
Yeah,
Okay.
but we can certainly let you know, so, anyway. But the dates are set, and it'll begin this fall. And I would expect that we will see some significant change as a result of that work. And the other piece, I just wanted to just update the folks in our community and our board around the work of partners in education. One of the pieces, and Laura will talk about equity and funding through the Blue Ribbon Commission, but there have been 2 key points of work through Partners in Ed, in addition to things like the Golden Apple, where we celebrate our teachers, and the youth apprenticeship programs. It's really focused in on equity in K-12 public education funding, and the other piece is an effort called Parents We Need You, really focused in on how do we bring parents into the conversation around support of their children as early as middle school, or even thinking about it sooner. Fox 11 has really focused in on taking the initiative around public service announcements, and they've invited and received support from WBAY and WFRV as well to be able to support that effort. The goal is to really get into places of business and really have conversations with parents during their work days, recognizing that they may not have a lot of additional time. And when Luis and I went to the JBS family gathering picnic, got permission to go into that work site to do some lunch and learns about how do we get parents much more engaged and involved and supported, so that they recognize that the opportunities like turbocharge, opportunities like academic career planning are for every child we serve, not just some. So really trying to break those barriers down. So that's one effort, and there's a whole ad campaign around it that you'll see. And then we'll get more to come on that. And then the other piece is really around the equity and funding piece. And there's really a significant effort on the part of our business community to really get folks to recognize the importance of investing in public education, with a recognition that without doing the investments, we will not have the opportunities in the workforce that we need for tomorrow. So it's a really they see it as an interdependent. Without successful students in public education and without the resources to get them there, to get a modern education in an equitable environment, they won't be where they need to be, and students certainly wouldn't be there. So those are the 2 big efforts out there as well that we've been engaging in. So that wraps up my updates, but I do have some success stories, and I don't know if Lori, I know that some of you are aware of the School Care Day, and that is a volunteer effort in our community. And right now, Amy Fish, our volunteer coordinator, shared recently that we have 7 schools right now who have 50 volunteers coming to support our teachers as they prepare for the school year. And that's at, they'll be at Fort Howard, the ELC, Elmore, Sullivan, Jefferson, and Nicolay. And then there will be an additional 15 volunteers at Tank then on August 21st. So a lot of really good support for our staff, and we're really excited about the community effort around this. And I know that some of you are aware of this. So getting the word out and saying, you know, that support for our schools is a really important effort that our teachers really and our staff really appreciate. So, and
That's one piece. And another piece, I received this lovely email from a graduate of West High School, class of 1968. And she wanted to share that they had a wonderful tour at their alma mater, and that everyone in attendance were thrilled of the tour, and they had great tour guides, Michelle Jacobson and Micah Hoffman, and Mr. Miller took them about, and they said it was quite the buzz during their reunion and the perfect kickoff, and she really wanted, for their 50th reunion, she just thought everyone should know how wonderful their tour was, and they had a great time. The last one is a piece that some of you may have already seen, but it's an important piece. NBC 26 does a really nice job of sharing through Partners in Ed and focus on our schools. This particular piece is Washington Middle School and Edge Barbershop in partnership. You'll see one of our staff members who works in our schools, Jen Ditzman. She, along with Kim Shannock, worked together on a project, and I know there were others involved, to ensure that the mission is to get every child to be a reader. And so there are a couple of other barbershops that are also joining in, Hanken and King's Barbershop as well. And great teamwork from the staff at Washington Middle School as well as the staff at Franklin Middle School. And I know that Kristen here at the district office as well, Rosick, was a part of this. And of course, Jen Ditzman, I believe, is featured on it. So, and that's, if we could just cue it up. And
NBC 26 today.
Reset, start fresh, and connect.
Brookhaven.
Here, connect.
Meteorologist Michael Fish.
We'll take the guesswork out of what's aware and how to prepare.
Local barbers are helping students become lifelong readers, all while getting your favorite fade or cut. The initiative is by Washington Middle School in Green Bay. It's tonight's Partners in Education. At Edge Barbershop in Green Bay, kids get more than just a new do. They're growing their minds.
There are books and spaces that they visit on a regular basis.
Language arts teacher Jennifer Ditzman says she wanted to implement this project after getting some inspiration from a fellow English teacher from Bronx, New York.
It's a literacy nonprofit that creates child-friendly reading spaces in barbershops.
I was really intrigued because the idea was to get books in male-centered spaces, so where kids are seeing themselves, and not in serious topics, but really highly engaging books.
So with a bit of motivation, Ditzman reached out to get this program going, and local barber Torrance Casey was excited to help. Tori's been doing this for the past year, and he says the reason behind it is to get the kids involved, motivated, and engaged to read a book.
I just love giving back, and you know, the children are our future, and we have to train them up in the way that they should go in life and show them how to be when they get older.
For 7th grader Marcus Gilson Jones, he says he loves reading while getting his hair cut, and for bigger reasons, he says he feels safe in this space.
You don't get judged by your color.
Teachers hope that Marcus, along with all of the students, will call themselves lifelong readers.
And if we can impact students and provide or help provide books that get them to say that and make reading exciting and fun, the hope is that we're impacting them to be lifelong readers and lifelong learners.
That's it. And
It's pretty neat, huh?
It is.
Yeah. It's a great idea, and Jen Ditzman is a wonderful, wonderful teacher. So grateful. That concludes my report. And then you have one more discussion
Yes, we have
item.
one discussion item. I'd entertain that motion, and then we can open it up for discussion.
I move that all open session board meetings involving hiring administrative staff changes to board policy or approving new spending over $50,000 be videotaped.
Is there a second?
Second.
Now, does this Is this motion intended to not include all of the rest of the spending, or is this on top of?
No, I have an amendment. I just
Oh,
thought we should
all right.
probably be,
Okay, go ahead.
we had to come up with something. I had to get a placeholder on there, so.
Right, go ahead with your motion.
Okay. I'm going to I move to amend the motion by adding at the beginning that all regular board meetings, comma, plus all open session, special board meetings, and then the rest would be the same. So the amendment would be to add that all regular board meetings plus, eliminate the second that we created, all open session, insert the word special board meetings, and then it continues on from there, which I think that covered. There was no intent to not do a regular board meeting no matter how short or how little was being spent.
So it reads that all regular board meetings plus all open session, special board meetings, and all open session board meetings involving hiring administrative staff, changes, et cetera,
They're just,
videotaped?
No, so if the amendments pass, the motion would read that all regular board meetings plus all open session special board meetings involving hiring administrative staff, changes to board policy, or approving new spending over $50,000 be videotaped.
So then we wouldn't record board retreats?
Say that again, please.
Well, it doesn't, that what you just said does not include board retreats.
I guess there's no intent here to there's no intent here to subtract from what we'd be
Right.
videotaping. It's to, I guess,
Yeah,
set up. I guess my thought would be if it was, you know, I think a board retreat we probably should. I think we probably would, and we did. I guess you could word it negatively and say that. I wanted to make sure that we're.
Well, what's the intent or the desire here? Is it to have all open sessions, no matter what the purpose, be videotaped?
I think
that's it, just state it that way.
I think the
And then
idea
it covers
was
everything.
that because we had, on occasion, and I don't think it happens all that often, but we have times when we're approving hiring, significant salary hiring, and other items that we don't have that taped. And it's just to avoid that. Sometimes when there's a session where we're just doing that, it's not attached to a regular session, but yet there's still significant hiring and spending.
Yeah.
But it's not taped for transparency purposes.
But to perhaps
Yeah.
not have to have it so specific that when on the occasions where we have a 10-minute meeting because we found a great grant opportunity, we have to immediately convene and give official board approval to try for the grant, and then we leave, to not have to drag out all the equipment for something where no money is being spent. However, to say that it's a way to say that just about all open session meetings should be taped, but there might be some occasional cases where we wouldn't.
Which is why you itemized these.
Right.
And you're speaking specifically to the 5-10-minute special meetings that, especially this time of year, often get called because we're in a hiring frenzy.
Right. So I think this motion would say that at a minimum, these types of board, it doesn't say only. I mean, so I think we would still, as a board, continue to do the retreats. I just don't know how the things to me that I think would be the most important to the public would be if there's administrators, there's policy changes, or there's significant new spending.
Then you may want to identify these as that all open session special board meetings.
I said that.
Did you say that?
So
Did you
all
amend it?
regular.
Did he?
And special.
But if you just,
That, no, I said plus, so that all regular board meetings
and the special ones.
plus all open session special board meetings that do one of these things be videotaped. And I would, for my part, I would certainly, if I think we have an established practice of taping the retreats, and I wouldn't be inclined to vote to not tape the retreats. I just don't know how else you would. I wanted to make sure that the most important things we put into an actual motion that they be taped.
I have a question about the contract then with CISA 7 that's taping it now. Is this going to change their contract? They're already contracted to tape.
They're contracted to tape our regular board meetings. Everything
Right.
else on top of that is à la
Right,
carte.
so we're not taking away from that at all, because that's already in a
Right. Doesn't
contract.
affect-
It's,
But it's you're adding expense.
You're adding
Right.
expense.
Right.
Right.
Because it's
Right.
all
Yeah.
à la carte at that point. So you're
Right.
adding 600 and, no, four?
So it'll be, it's $450 per event, regardless of length of meeting. And then $150 per video hour, and then broken out to 15-minute increments after that, for like closed captions.
So it's 450 just to have them come and tape whatever the length is. And then is the $150, the first 150 prorated? Because if we have a 15-minute meeting, will it be divided by 4? Or do they charge that 150 regardless of whether it's 15 minutes or an hour?
I'd have to double check our invoicing, but I think it's $150 for the closed captioning, and then it's broken increments.
And then after that, it's by 15 minutes. So it's $600 regardless of the length of the meeting.
but if we go ahead and we do an RFP and we get some new equipment in here and we do as we talked tonight, or we discussed tonight about having staff possibly operate off of a laptop, in the future, we can see that we probably won't be applying the same because we'll be possibly doing it internally.
No, but that's in a year.
That's in
Right,
there.
sure. But I mean, in a year, I mean, like you said, a lot of the staff hiring is done prior to the school year starting in general. So it's gonna,
So bottom line is, I think
Overlap.
whatever we're doing a week from Wednesday is a very short meeting, but it involves high-profile people. It involves administrators. Yes, I think we should spend the 600 and have it taped. But if we have another one, if we have one that has to be put together quickly next week to hire just a list of non-administrative staff, and there's no new adding of positions or anything, I would think we could probably skip that
Why are
one.
you separating out
why are
administrative
you
staff if they are positions that are already in the table of organization?
Well, I think because I can think of times where there's been, I think there have been meetings where there's been differences of opinion about and split votes on hiring motions that included administrative positions. I can't think of any that have included teacher positions, but I'm not gonna, I mean, I'm trying to have some kind of a line where you could reasonably say maybe we don't need to videotape this one, but it wouldn't take a lot of convincing for me to say just anything where any money is spent, just play it safe and do it. I'm trying to find a little bit of a balance here.
well, I think the dollar amount is what it is. It's, 40,000 compared to 122,000 is a very significant difference in spending.
But if the position has been approved,
Right.
I mean, the discussion about, where I've seen, in fact, I've voted against them, is in terms of adding an administrative position to the table of organization. But for sake of argument here, East High School needs a principal. That's, I don't know that anybody's gonna argue against that. It's in the table of organization. So that person has been interviewed, vetted, what have you, brought forward. How is that any different than they also need language arts teachers, math teachers, that sort of thing? I'm not talking about new positions being added, I'm talking about existing positions. I mean, why is that line there? Just because those salaries are higher?
That's part of it, but I think that there, again, I can think of.
Well, then we're getting into class warfare here, and
Right,
I
the
just.
special board meetings are called to actually hire people and fill positions. The time to argue about whether or not the position should exist happens at the regular board meeting when the idea is proposed to the board and is discussed. That's the time to argue about that position, or argue against or for that position. Once the position has been approved and we're actually talking about a specific person to fill that position, then?
I think the higher you go up in the positions, we talk about the principal being the key instructional leader. I don't think I've ever voted against a principal hire. I have voted against some high-level administrative hires in the past.
But you were voting against the position.
The times I can remember, yes, but I only speak for myself. I think if I had, I think
I just think it is getting a little discriminatory if you're just gonna videotape when we're hiring administrators.
I also find it hard to, I mean, I know it's $600, but it just seems like a lot of money for something that we're approving positions that have already been approved. We're just approving the people to fill the positions.
But we're actually voting on it that night, and I think sometimes it's important to have a discussion and then we hear from the public possibly, and then, I mean, we don't really take a vote until that night.
Yeah, but we don't
vote
generally
to
hear
hire
from
the
the
person.
public
Right.
on personnel
No.
issues, whether we're gonna hire a certain person or not. The public
I
has-
would disagree with that. I think it's important to actually have more transparency in that.
I think we've got plenty of transparency. I think there's lots of transparency in this.
I think we
Now,
can
if
improve
you're
on
talking,
that.
you want to go to the public every time we approve a hire? Is that what you're saying?
Nope, I actually didn't say that. I think we.
Well, that's what it's sounding like, Rhonda.
That's not even what the motion says. What we're discussing is when there's significant spending on staff that's not in the classroom. I hear from a lot of people, and then it's not transparent, the vote. And that, I don't know what you hear, but that's what I hear. It doesn't say anything about any of that. It actually just says over 50,000. I mean, if we want to tape everything, that's fine, but I would argue I don't believe there's enough transparency. I think we're even improving on it, but I will never say there's enough.
I don't know how the public can weigh in on a person when they've done none of the vetting or interviewing or, I mean, how do you weigh in on a person that you don't know as to whether they deserve to have a contract or not? When the position has already been approved.
I would say they probably know about as much as some of us do because we're not part of those interviews. So how can I vote on that? I mean, you can take that same application to me voting on something that I don't have a lot of information about because I wasn't part of a vetting process either. I mean, you could say the same thing to me.
Right, but we put people in place to do that process, and we trust the people that do the vetting and the interviewing, and we know what that process is to have that happen. We've had board members sitting on some of those interview committees, which so I mean that's the process that we use for that.
I mean, if you're fine to say, one, we have enough transparency, we shouldn't videotape the votes that we take when we spend over $100,000 to administration, that's fine. I will vote every time and possibly bring something to record it. I think it's important I don't really want to have to do that, nor do I probably have enough data on my phone. But I think myself personally, I want to make sure, and I think when we're talking about spending and asking for more money from the state level, I think we have to be very careful that we are as transparent as we can be.
I don't think anybody's arguing that
No.
point,
But
But when you were talking about having people weigh in, well, how are they gonna weigh in if we've already voted on it? I mean, the recording, people are seeing that after the fact, so.
Well, they weigh in sometimes in elections.
So how do we decide right now? Okay, so right now, we tape the regular meetings. We try to make the special, like, on, I think we have one posted for the September 10th meeting of presuming that there's likely to be hiring. So we put that right before, so it's just very easily appended into the same meeting. There was substantial discussion at one involving the hiring for Washington, but that worked out okay because that was appended onto a regular meeting. I thought trying to have some kind of rules would be a good idea for what's the minimum bar as to what do we tape.
I have absolutely no problem with recording every single open session, whether it's hiring, special board meetings, even board retreats. I have absolutely no problem with that whatsoever. As far as suggestions that we are anything less than transparent, I don't think that's accurate or fair. Now, we have not done that before. It's come up now as a new suggestion, and I fully support it. But I don't like the idea of saying that we need to separate out administrative staff from everybody else because somehow they're inherently evil or dishonest or whatever it might be that we've got these concerns about administrative staff. If this is just about all of our actions being out there, open and transparent, absolutely, I'm with you 100%.
And I don't think I personally wasn't trying to separate. I think we were trying to figure out a dollar amount that we could get support for in general. That's what it was. There's nothing listed here, no email communication.
There are teachers who make over $50,000.
Right.
Okay, well,
So I meant so why don't we just?
That's not what it was, though. No, let me finish this.
Okay.
So, that's not what it was. No, you did not receive any email communication that said the word evil, that said the word administrator, that said anything involved in any of that alludes to the fact that we're trying to do something that's, deceptive and with an agenda. That's not it at all. I think it's just we wanted to make sure that we could get this passed and that it would be, ideally, I would love to videotape everything and have that if possible. It seems like it'll be a lot more cost effective, but I would never in a million years, I know you can look me in the face and tell me that you did not receive anything with those words. I would never say that. That's not the point. The point is we can improve on what we're doing. I think it's important when we spend a significant amount of money, and by the way, it's not our money. When we're spending other people's money, I think we need to make sure that we are covering that as much as possible.
We are elected stewards of this money, and I'm not going to approve anything that singles out.
And I'm happy to change it to in general, that's fine. I think there was no deception here or any intent to make people feel bad at all. I think it was just we figured it would get passed if there was a dollar amount set.
Yeah,
That's all it is.
And I meant something completely different by the 50,000 in new spending as well, because I was talking about it's obviously much cleaner if we just say that all open session board meetings be videotaped, and if there's probably more support with the wider gate than with the narrower one here, so I'm fine with that.
And that is ideally what we would like to have. If that if there's more support for that, fine, it'd be great.
I would hope that we would we would call special board meetings less frequently.
I would think we could, let me just throw this out here too. We could,
We can't.
Right, we can't not call them.
Right.
we could probably do this though. There could probably be, I would think there could probably be since we would essentially be creating an internal rule, if we had to have a 5-minute meeting to approve a last-minute grant application, we could probably make a motion to suspend the rules and not tape it if it was a single item of business. Or maybe we just say all of them. We wouldn't have to necessarily, okay, if it was one of those 5-minute ones, we could do it with a single little camera. We wouldn't necessarily have to do it with all this either. If it was
a good point.
For those cases of those 5-minute meetings, we could do it.
Closed captioning.
Pardon me?
You will because of closed captioning.
Um,
All your videos are gonna have to be closed captioned.
We don't have closed captioning capability in district?
We can't use YouTube,
Right.
sorry.
That's okay.
How many of these do we actually have outside of being attached to the front end of a regular board
Right.
meeting?
Not many.
Not very many.
Not many.
Not many.
almost none. I mean, I just
Yeah.
wanna,
Not many.
Well, I was asked not to shout across the room.
Oh, that's good.
Thank you.
So, because it doesn't work for closed captioning.
Oh, okay.
So basically, the closed captioning, we can't use YouTube closed captioning for board meetings. It just doesn't meet ADA requirements, and that's been, I forget who exactly ruled on that, but,
Okay.
so we would have to send the video to CISA to have a closed caption. The concern would be is that if we were to set up a camera and videotape, I don't know if the sound quality, by not using the microphones, and then the mixer would be sufficient for the closed captioning purposes. I'd have to check in with CISA on that.
Thank you.
We would just do our very, very best to try to align as many as we can. I mean, we typically do, but.
You do, and if you can't, you can't. I
and
mean, we
we
can't
can't,
not
but-
do the hiring process.
I mean, I'm thinking
because-
of one, actually, no, a lot of the, now that I
There'll be
think about.
two this summer. We had one, few weeks
Couple
ago,
weeks
and we
ago.
have one scheduled for next week.
Yep.
And then
Okay.
every time you go into closed session, there's an open session before to go into closed session. So those would have to.
I would say, yeah, we would,
I would
if we're,
exclude
I would
those.
exclude those. So now we just have kind of a mess on the floor here, so.
We do.
Brenda?
Oh, no.
Withdraw, you can withdraw your amendment, and you made the motion, so you can,
You have to do it in reverse order, but okay. So
Yeah.
I ask unanimous consent to withdraw my amendment.
Yes, sure.
Gladly, yes.
without objection.
Brenda?
Yeah.
Yeah? I mean, I'm asking unanimous consent, and I think everyone did, but you have to.
Oh,
say.
yeah, sorry.
Okay.
I
And
didn't, but I will.
Okay. I ask unanimous consent to withdraw my motion.
All right.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
By me.
And I'm gonna just think before I make again.
No, I think Noah's gonna tell you what you're gonna say.
I'm fine with that.
So you want everyone is looking for all open session meetings, except for the ones immediately preceding a closed session meeting. Because that motion to go into closed session is done.
Right, and those are posted as special board meeting closed session, right? But then it does
But they
say
have
it,
to
that they have to
open in
open
a-
an open session.
Open session.
Right.
Both ways now.
But we're not taking votes in those.
Right, but
Yeah,
if we
do.
say.
We take a vote to go
We
in.
take a
No,
vote.
we take
that's
one-
not what I mean. We're not.
I know we
voting to
don't
spend
mean
money
it, we
on
just
We're
wanna
not
say it right.
spending money, so how are we gonna say that we're not, anytime we're not spending money, we're accepting money,
Oh, okay.
but we won't spend money.
Well, no, it's posted. I mean, it should be posted in general. Isn't it posted what
Yep,
we're doing?
I got it here.
Right.
So we're gonna get it,
So if he
okay.
wants to create exclusions.
But there's only one, the only one exclusion, I think, would be where you meet in open session to immediately go into closed session and there's no open session business.
But what about your open session, special meeting open session to approve a grant application?
Well, what if we take, just take Rhonda's motion again, and that all open session board meetings involve, for the purpose of hiring staff, changing board policy, or approving new spending over $50,000 be videotaped? Or, how, administration can spend up to $100,000 without board approval, so.
Right, so why does that
Could we go to $100,000?
Yeah.
Sure.
We just discussed this week.
Okay.
Yeah, it's 100,000.
It's 100.
It's 100.
Okay. So all hiring, all policy changes, new spending over 100,000, and then we would certainly continue to do things like retreats, but we're not gonna codify that one.
No.
Okay. Because you can always tape more, you can always choose to tape more, but you can't go below the bar that we're gonna.
Yeah, but a retreat doesn't
So
involve
then,
any of those things
would
that you
Would
listed.
I offer an amendment to
Well,
change
now there's
the
nothing
language
on
or
the, now there's nothing on the floor anymore, so
Well,
we
her-
could
her
start,
motion's still
not
on the floor.
anymore. Well, I made it
He
and I
made it,
withdrew
so
it,
no.
so now there's
Oh, I thought
nothing
you
else.
I thought you withdrew the
I
amendment.
did.
You withdrew both, we
I
said
did
yes twice.
2 rounds of that, yeah.
Oh.
So the floor's clean. But this is, I don't think saying that having certain ones that must be taped means that we don't tape other ones. It just means that we have to tape certain ones.
Yeah, that's what that would say, that.
Right.
It doesn't mean that we're not taping the retreats. Our present practice is that we tape the retreats. I can't imagine we would stop taping the retreats, but
Do we?
we're.
We do.
Yeah, we
have
have
been.
We've been
Yeah, we have.
retaping, we've been
Taping
taping.
everything.
Right.
These have been very unobtrusive then. Would that satisfy, if the motion were to say that all special board meetings involving hiring staff, changing board policy, or approving new spending over $100,000 be videotaped? I'm asking you.
So we're not going to, we're gonna put a dollar figure in there then, is that?
Well,
I
there
thought
is
we weren't
one.
gonna do
There was
that.
one.
Right, no, I,
50,000 was
I,
in there.
and we've discussed how horrible that was, and I apologize, because I had no ill intent. But is that the number, 100?
Okay.
The
That's our
administration has the
policy.
authority to spend up to $100,000
Okay.
without board approval.
That's fine, I mean, if that's, yeah,
And it's already in policies.
right.
Right.
So this gives no guidance to the rest of,
This would be specific to special board meetings for the purpose of hiring staff, changing board policy, or approving new spending over $100,000.
yeah, but the only special board meeting we're gonna call that's not attached to a regular board meeting is hiring. We would never call a special board meeting out of the blue to approve
Well, you don't know, I
policy
mean,
or
it could
spending.
happen, but
I can't imagine.
You could get some
if
kind
it
of.
does, you're covered then.
You could find that you missed some, there was some kind of deadline for a
Grant.
The feds come out and say
the
you
feds
have to
come
have
out and
this
say, hey, you
policy,
missed
or-
this policy and you've got till September 2nd, or we're gonna.
Or if we don't need it, we don't do it. If we
That's right,
need it, we
yeah.
do it.
All right, make a motion that says, all special board meetings involving, for the purpose of hiring staff, changing board policy, or approving new spending over $100,000 will be videotaped.
Open session, right?
I said special board meetings, so,
You want special board meetings?
that's what I said, yeah, I mean, a special board meeting is an open session.
Oh, aren't they all special?
I'll second.
What do you have?
That all special board meetings involving hiring staff, changes to.
For the purpose of hiring staff, I'm sorry.
Changes to board policy or approving new spending over 100,000 or be videotaped.
Because you post them as special board meetings, don't you, Sandy?
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
And the special makes sense.
So someone reads this motion and goes, oh, they're not doing retreats or regular board meetings or work sessions anymore, they're just doing this. That's what somebody cold coming to this is gonna look at that and go, well, that's weird, they're only taping a very limited amount of board meetings.
Well,
Okay, can I amend my own motion then?
Please.
All right. Move that in addition to all
There you
regular open session board meetings, any special board meetings for the purpose of hiring staff, changing board policy, or approving new spending over $100,000 be videotaped.
That's better.
Does that commit us to videotaping board engagement sessions? Things that we've done, like at Purple and West? or different-
Are they listed
They're
as
not
special board meetings? If they're not.
No, but
They're not board meetings.
But they're open session meetings.
But it-
'Cause you
But
said-
they're not board.
but they're
It's not
not
a board
involved,
meeting?
Okay.
those wouldn't be
Okay.
involving hiring staff, changing board policy, or spending money, so that,
Well, but neither is a retreat.
Right.
We've got that now included.
Could you
all those
please
in
read
there.
that, Sandy, not to
Just
belabor
working
this?
on it right now.
All right.
Yeah, I would say it's not a board meeting, an engagement session.
Okay.
Because we're not making any decisions at the, at those. We're not doing board business at that.
Or having agendas or
any of that
stuff.
Yeah. So I would say that wouldn't be covered.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's
Okay. In addition to all regular board meetings and special board meetings for the purpose of hiring staff, changes to board policy, or approving new spending over 100,000 be videotaped.
Sandy, could you read it one more time?
Yeah, I think we missed something there.
In addition to all regular board meetings and special board meetings for the
Not
purpose
and,
of
no,
Not
no.
and.
all, in addition to.
In addition to all
all
regular board meetings.
and all special board meetings?
No,
No.
no.
Okay, that's what I said.
In addition to all regular board meetings,
Yep.
Comma,
comma. Special board meetings for the purpose of hiring staff, comma. Changes to board policy, comma, or approving new spending over $100,000 be videotaped.
Okay, in addition to all regular board meetings, comma, special board meetings for the purpose of hiring staff, changes to board policies, or approving new spending over 100,000 be videotaped.
Will be videotaped.
Will be
yeah.
videotaped.
Yeah. Missed the verb in there.
It
What?
doesn't include board retreats.
right, but this motion doesn't mean we have to stop taping board retreats.
Well, but I'm trying to make it
Just
clear.
trying to make it clear
so
what
that
we are
when
taping.
somebody comes to me and says, are we doing this or not? I can say, the policy says we do this.
So in
Okay,
addition to-
comma, after, again,
Or the-
before special board meetings, put board retreats in.
What if we do?
Just add
Okay.
board
Do we have to say
retreats.
work
Is that board
sessions
retreats,
too, or
huh?
no? Specify work
That's a
sessions?
regular board meeting,
All
I
right.
think.
Which one?
Work session's a regular board meeting,
Okay,
I would say.
all right.
But in addition to all regular board meetings, comma, board retreats, comma.
Comma, yes.
And board retreats, no comma.
Yeah, and, yeah, that's right.
No comma between, yeah.
Okay, so I'm still having a hard, again, it's not a lot of money, but I'm having a hard time justifying $600 when we have meeting meeting minutes that indicate,
Votes and.
indicate votes.
Meeting minutes
Things
don't
like that.
indicate any discussion at all, though.
Don't what, I'm sorry?
They don't reflect the discussion at all. And think about how many would we actually have to do, because if, again, we go and we get some equipment and we purchase it and seems to be a lot more user-friendly, and we have someone on staff do that. Are we, we've already had, how many already, special board meetings for hiring? Yep, so we have how many left to go before the school year starts?
Maybe one.
Right, so then we're looking at, how long is the contract up?
It's a year.
But like,
Has
what is?
nothing to do with the contract.
No, what I'm saying is though, we may be doing something different in
Right.
regards to taping,
Right.
which could mean an entirely different,
Right.
money issue. So if we're looking at doing something, it's not like we're asking to start, dropping all of this in the bucket every week for the next year. We're asking for something that's really essentially for the future, because we have one more left.
I think your point about minutes not reflecting discussion, and I think it's well taken. I also think that having more out there be videotaped where people can view on YouTube is responsive to the times. I for $600, I think it's worth it.
Well, and again, if we can have someone, we have equipment and someone can actually be operating it here, then really in the future, we're not going to be probably spending a lot of extra money on it.
That'd be my hope too.
Right, probably just
remains to be
the captioning, and that
Right.
probably can be up, since that could probably just be rolled into another.
And we already discussed that it doesn't happen that often, so this is somewhat random, but I think it's important to have it out there.
Should we hear it one more time?
In addition to all regular board meetings, board retreats, and special board meetings for the purpose of hiring staff, changes to board policy, or approving new spending over $100,000 will be videotaped.
I think we lost something here again.
And the word "and" between the first part and the second part.
It's in a series of 3, don't you need an and in there?
Because the first two we're already doing.
In addition to all regular board meetings.
And board retreats.
And board
And
retreat.
board retreats.
And board retreats.
No
Comma.
comment, just in board retreats.
Then
See, it's in addition to the board meetings and the retreats, we're putting the new thing in there about the special board meetings for the purpose, that's something new, so that's not part of the series of 3.
In addition to all regular board meetings and board retreats, comma, special board meetings for the purpose of hiring staff, changes to board policy, or approving new spending over $100,000 will be videotaped.
That's it?
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay, I think I need a second.
Second.
Sandy?
Maloney?
Aye.
Warren?
Aye.
Dorf?
Aye.
Sitnikov?
Aye.
Becker?
Aye.
White?
Carried 6-0.
That concludes my report. Thank you. It's the last one.
At,
You can take 5.
That would be good. Okay. All right.
At some point, I would like to have I'm very uncomfortable having public comment about personnel decisions that we make in terms of people. I'm not uncomfortable having conversations about the positions. I'm very uncomfortable having public comment about people.
Oh, I would agree, I mean, that's,
But that's what,
Well,
no.
that was not created here, though.
no, it was not. But
Right.
but Rhonda disagrees with that statement, and I would like to put that on an agenda and have a conversation and make a decision about that.
Can I ask what
'Cause
we'd
we
be making
haven't-
a decision on, though? I mean, I don't know what you're asking us to adhere to when we would decide on that.
About when we want to have public comment or not during our board meetings.
Okay, so we would literally tell the public, we're going to spend a significant amount of your money, and you can't say anything about it.
We can't have this conversation now because it's not on the agenda.
Right.
But I'm going to ask that it be put on an agenda so that we can talk about it.
Can the public talk about that? We're talking about it?
Sure, they can talk about
Okay.
that. So anyway, that'll be on can you put that on our agenda for September,
September 10th?
yeah.
Okay. Sure, we'll take it.
Maybe
No, business, it should be.
Human
Yeah,
resources.
business.
Human, yeah, it's human resource, put it under business, yeah, thanks.
All right, that's a good thought.
All right,
I think, well, or should that be part, should there be a legal update for that? Because there are some issues
I
there.
think the legal update, yeah.
I think that's more of a legal issue. There are legalities involved in
yeah,
that.
There
I
are.
agree,
Discrimination,
right,
Yes.
all sorts of,
right,
Right.
when we start commenting on
yep,
it.
I agree.
That would be a legal update.
Yeah, I'll draft.
Okay.
So,
Legal update
You
for-
want a legal update for September?
yeah,
17th?
but do we have to wait?
Can you
we
do a
just
legal
tuck it
update on
in
the 10th?
On the 10th?
Under human resources?
What?
Yeah,
Under human resources?
that's our work session. Could you?
Yep.
Yeah, yeah, because we'll be voting on the 17th again. Yeah,
Right.
okay,
Okay.
I'm under human resources.
yeah.
What's the term, tortious interference or something like that? It comes to
All right,
mind.
does anybody need a
Positions
break?
been
We've been
approved.
here for over 3 hours. We've got, I don't know how much.
Yeah.
Yeah, why don't we, because we've got
Let's just
another
take a
page.
quick break, because we got
Yeah, we've got another page.
some more stuff.
What did you
Okay.
call it? Tortious interference?
It's a legal
Tortious
term.
interference.
It's a legal, it's not even legal term. Taught from legal.
Be approved is handled next.
I'll second that.
Thank you.
We need to vote to reorder.
Yep.
Sandy?
McCoy?
Aye.
Becker?
Aye.
Maloney?
Aye.
Sitnikov?
Aye.
Dorn?
Aye.
Dorn?
Aye.
Carried 6-0.
I move that the consent items as presented be approved.
Second.
Sandy?
Becker?
Aye.
Sitnikov?
Aye.
Maloney?
Aye.
Dorn?
Aye.
Warren?
Aye.
McCoy?
Aye.
Carried 6-0. And I know we have, I'm sorry, your name again? Effort. Effort has been patiently waiting. He's now duly employed by our district.
Welcome and thank you for
Welcome.
your patience.
Yes.
Duly employed.
Okay. All right, so then we'll go back to our agenda and, do you have Intercity Student Council?
Short one.
Okay, we'll go to Intercity Student Council report, and I'll turn that over to Noah.
So as I mentioned at my last report, there was our previous advisor had resigned from her advisor position at around in June. So we started the process to select a new advisor, and we had a candidate lined up who dropped from the process right before their interview. So now the position is reopened to district staff if they want to apply for it. So we're looking at candidates again. And although I haven't received anything formal, there is talk of just calling the September meeting to order with Timothy Flood as our temporary advisor before we formally get our new ICSC advisor. But other than that, we don't conduct much business over the summer, so that's it.
Okay. Do we have the meeting dates on our calendar for ICSC?
Not yet.
Do you usually work with the advisor, right? All right, because we should probably get those on our calendar.
Do you want me to schedule them without the advisor?
Well, you could at least get the students in on it, even if there's no advisor yet.
Right, 'cause
after the start of the year.
as a council, we're going to meet monthly anyway, so if you just send 4 dates, they'll all end up saying yes, and we can go through with it even if there's no advisor. And really, that should probably be done through the president anyway, given the Constitution. So yeah, I don't see why the ICSC would have a problem with that.
I don't know if I'm assuming the advisor would want to be at those meetings though. So why don't we just wait
First one's usually not until
till October, yeah. Why don't you put a hold on, can you do that? Just put October on our calendar as a hold date. So if the advisor can make it, at least we have, got it on our calendar. If they can't, then we'll, you know, figure something else out. All right, next is our legislative liaison report. I'll turn that over to Laura.
Okay, we only have 2 items. Number 1, the article that you received from DPI regarding DPI budget requests for the 2019-2021 state budget. State Superintendent Tony Evers has announced some of the items that he will be requesting in the next state budget, and they include guaranteeing that the state fund 2/3 of each student's education, indexing revenue limits to inflation, increasing funding for 4-year-old kindergarten programs, doubling the funding for robotics leagues and increasing support for gifted and talented programming, increasing the rate of reimbursement for bilingual, bicultural aid from 8% to 30% by 2021. This is among other things. These are just sort of some of the highlights. He also is requesting changes in the way pre-K students' attendance is counted for the purpose of distributing state aid. State law currently requires that students who are enrolled in a full-day program be counted as 1/2 pupil rather than 1 whole pupil.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Do we have full day?
Just
4-year-old
just our Head Start. We have some at Head Start now.
But that's
But our
not,
other
but that's not
4Ks,
state funded.
But that's federal, so no, we
Oh,
don't.
yeah, so
Okay.
we wouldn't, that
Wouldn't affect us,
wouldn't
okay.
affect
Well,
us, that particular
but,
one.
but it could, if the funding is there and we want to have students come all day.
So it could change the way we operate.
Oh, I see.
Do we
So
have
If the
space
funding
to
is
make
there.
it?
There could be space. I mean, I think one of the things that is really important is to recognize, as we sat tonight and heard how much lifting has to happen and how many additional resources, particularly around literacy. Everybody knows the research says earlier is better.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and I've even heard rumblings of 3K, so I don't know if that's.
So additional funding could drive that.
Yeah,
So
that
right
would-
now, schools that have all-day 4-year-old kindergarten only get funded for half of a
It's-
student,
0.6.
even though they're there
All
5
day.
days a week?
I'm not sure that there are districts that have it 5 days a week,
Okay.
all day,
Okay,
because the funding is for
right,
60%.
okay, all right.
All right, the second item is the article from the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel entitled Special Needs Vouchers Cost Wisconsin Public Schools, $5.6 million in the first 2 years. And I'm just gonna quote a couple of the main points. The article states, quote, "The Wisconsin program that allows special needs students to attend private school on taxpayer-funded vouchers costs local public schools almost $5.6 million in state funding over the last 2 years, including hundreds of districts where no residents participate in the program." And this was according to a new state audit. The article goes on to state, while parents with children in the program voiced more favorable views of the private schools that their public school than their public school counterparts, according to the audit, it also confirmed that what many critics have feared, that it would serve primarily children already in public schools and leave children with the greatest needs to the public schools. And that's it. You got the articles and read them, I'm sure, so.
I didn't understand the last sentence of that article. They were critical of the survey, saying it was not limited to parents whose children had attended public schools.
So it came from parents who were taking advantage of the special ed voucher who had never attended a public school, is that what
Right.
that means?
Not limited to parents whose children had attended.
You're making a judgment about public when they never attended? That's what it sounds like.
It was not limited to parents. Never mind, go ahead and we'll move on. All right, and then, I don't know if anybody has board member school visits. updates. School's not in session.
No, just
I
watering
know
the
some of you
gardens at
attended
Howe.
the library, the
Dedication?
library dedication at Howe. And we attended some of us attended the detailing
Graduate?
certification.
Yes.
At
graduation
Doris Ford.
At Doris Ford.
Yes, we did.
That
That was
was,
a very, very nice event.
yes.
It was.
That was a great program, too. All right, and then any district events? We already talked about the back-to-school events coming up, so.
There's a lot.
Next is our system reports, and that, the first is teaching and learning, and that will be facilitated by Ed Dorf.
Okay, thank you. We've got 4 items that we discussed in the work session that we're moving forward as motions, and I'll start with advanced placement statistics resources, and I move that the advanced placement statistics resources as presented be approved.
Second.
Sandy? Oh, sorry, Andrew.
Yeah, so this is potentially related to the resources. My concern certainly hasn't gone away, realizing how long it's been since it's run at West, and whether that was instructor driven or whatnot. I think we need to be offering courses everywhere. I know it can't necessarily always be every single year that a course runs somewhere, but I think that needs to be out on the table. This is an important class, and where it's related to resources, I guess, is that if this were to be offered, I want to make sure that whatever resources we're going to buy would be compatible if we were to do something like a distance learning course. I mean, I don't know why it wouldn't, but it's on the agenda, so I have the opportunity to say something about it where I am.
And I remember you bringing that up during the work session too, and Mr. Freeze responding that if classes were added, just as a matter of course, they would purchase additional resources for that. So I think that point is covered, but I agree with you. I wish we were offering these things on a regular basis everywhere, but there it is.
Sandy?
Warren?
Aye.
Becker?
Aye.
McCoy? Aye. Sitnikov?
Aye.
Maloney?
Aye.
Dorf?
Aye.
Carried 6-0.
Move that the English learner A, B, and C resources, $77,143.91 as presented be approved.
Second.
Sandy?
Maloney?
Aye.
Warren?
Aye.
Dorf?
Aye.
Sitnikov?
Aye.
McCoy?
Aye.
Becker?
Aye.
Carried 6-0.
I move that English language intensive mathematics 1, 2, and 3 enrichment content essential documents and enrichment resources, price being $16,621.06 as presented be approved.
Second.
Sandy?
McCoy?
Aye.
Dorf?
Aye.
Becker?
Aye.
Warren?
Aye.
Maloney?
Aye.
Sitnikov?
Aye.
Carried 6-0.
And I move that the John Dewey Academy of Learning Charter addendum as presented be approved.
Second.
Sandy?
Sitnikov?
Aye.
Maloney?
Aye.
Warren?
Aye.
McCoy? Aye. Dorf?
Aye.
Becker?
Aye.
Carried 6-0.
That concludes teaching and learning.
All right, next is organizational support, and that will be facilitated by Andrew Becker.
All right. So we have, under business and finance, I'll move that the open enrollment survey project focus group and professional development proposal as presented be approved.
Second.
Sandy?
Becker?
Aye.
McCoy? Aye. Dorf?
Aye.
Warren?
Aye.
Maloney?
Aye.
Sitnikov?
Aye.
Carried 6-0.
Then I move that the table of organization be modified to reflect the change of senior programmer manager of programmers 12 months to programmer coordinator 12 months with salary change and job descriptions as presented be approved.
Second.
Sandy?
Maloney?
Aye.
Warren?
Aye.
Dorf?
Aye.
Sitnikov?
Aye.
Becker?
Aye.
McCoy? Aye.
Carried 6-0. I'd entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
All in
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? We are adjourned.
You have been watching the Green Bay Area Public School District's Board of Education meeting. Please visit the school district's website, www.gbaps.org, to view the program again. If you cannot fully access the information on this video, please let us know the accessibility issue you are having by calling 920-448-2025 or by email at communications@gbaps.org. We will try to provide the information to you in an alternative format and/or make the necessary improvements to make the information accessible.